This program is brought to you by Newsworks in cooperation with the City of Eau Claire. This program is simulcast on WRFP-LP 101.9 FM.
I call to order this annual meeting of the Eau Claire County Board of Supervisors on this Tuesday, November the 5th. Supervisors, please rise for honoring the flag and a moment of reflection by Supervisor Neiman. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
In my work as a midwife, I would gaze upon each newborn baby whose birth I had just assisted and wonder what was to become of this child. Would she be the first woman president of the United States? Would he be the diplomat who found a way to end war for all time? Would she end up in prison? Would his life be wasted from the despair that led him to substance abuse? I would say a prayer that each child be spared suffering and reach his or her full potential. I would now like to offer Ina J. Hughes' prayer for all the children. We pray for children who sneak popsicles before supper, who erase holes in math workbooks, who throw tantrums in the grocery store and pick at their food, who like ghost stories, who can never find their shoes. We pray for those who stare at photographers from behind barbed wire, who can't bound down the street in a new pair of sneakers, who are born in places we wouldn't be caught dead in, who never go to the circus, who live in an X-rated world. We pray for children who sleep with the dog and bury the goldfish, who bring us sticky kisses and fistfuls of dandelions, who get visits from the tooth fairy, who hug us in a hurry and forget their lunch money. And we pray for those who never get dessert, who have no safe blanket to drag behind them, who watch their parents watch them die, who can't find any bread to steal, who don't have any rooms to clean up, whose pictures aren't on anyone's dresser, whose monsters are real. We pray for children who spend all their allowance before Tuesday, who shove dirty clothes under the bed and never rinse out the tub, who don't like to be kissed in front of the carpool, who squirm in church or temple and scream in the phone, whose tears we sometimes laugh at and whose smiles can make us cry. And we pray for those whose nightmares come in the daytime, who will eat anything, who have never seen a dentist, who aren't spoiled by anybody, who go to bed hungry and cry themselves to sleep, who live and move but have no being. We pray for the children who want to be carried and for those who must, for those we never give up on and for those who don't get a second chance, for those we smother and for those who will grab the hand of anybody kind enough to offer it. We pray for the children. We have also been children and are in need of the same compassion. Let us pray to whatever God we know for guidance as we struggle to provide with finite resources the funds needed to create a vibrant, thriving, caring community. Let us not let fear of scarcity cloud our vision, our decision-making, and our actions. As we work, let us instead acknowledge with gratitude the abundant resources and power we have been given, with the intention to use these gifts wisely and in service of the common good, the able, the disabled, the children who are our future. In this way, let us be the beloved community. Truly, power to these statements. May they be the ground from which all our actions grow in faith and trust. So it is, so let it be.
Thank you. Tonight's meeting will be broadcast on Valley Media Works, Charter Channel 994 on Thursday at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. following the meeting, WFRP LP 101.9 FM, and online at valleymediaworks.org. Next item is our call of the roll. Supervisors, please take your keypads in hand and indicate your presence. Supervisor Knight.
And Supervisor Wilkie?
Thank you. 27 members present. We do have quorum. I'm going to announce at the beginning of the meeting that we have a change in the order of the items on the agenda. Under number 11, file number 73, which has to do with daily juvenile detention rate establishment. Without objection, I'm going to move that to item 6.5, right after item 6, because it has to be resolved. You can't hear me? I'm sorry.
Try it again.
Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay. This is not Verizon. Okay. Sorry. I'll start over. I am moving file 73 from item number 7 back earlier on our agenda prior to our budget deliberation because it has some relevance to the budget. So without objection, I am moving it to item 6.5 on our agenda, and we'll take it up at that time. Next item on our agenda is approval of the Journal of Proceedings of October the 15th, 2019. Motion by Supervisor Leary, second by Supervisor Werboom. Are there any additions, deletions, or corrections to the Journal of Proceedings? Hearing none, we'll do this by voice vote. All in favor of approval of the Journal of Proceedings, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed by nay. It is unanimous. Thank you very much. Next on our agenda is the public hearing on the annual budget. You have in front of you on your agenda the section 2.04.010C from our county code, which describes this process. Before we begin public hearing, we're going to have a brief presentation by our county administrator.
Thank you. Good evening. And I will stand closer.
It's not on. Is it on?
Is this on? Okay.
Now it is.
Thank you. Good evening. The budget that you have this evening is a budget that has gone through many discussions and much deliberation up to this point. The Board of Supervisors will finalize their recommendations for the 2020 budget this evening, and I have a very brief presentation to go over with you regarding their recommendations and what the implications of the budget are. And so if you could switch to the presentation, please. Do you have to do that, Janet, or? Thank you. So to begin this evening's budget process, the vice chair will actually be taking the place of the board chair, and they will walk the board through the proposed budget. Supervisors will have an opportunity to speak to the various departmental budgets as they're presented. The amendment process. The vice chair will first begin by taking the pre-submitted written amendments for consideration. Each of those will need to still have a motion to be considered, and then a second. Any amendments made from the floor, if they require additional revenue, the proposer of the amendment will need to identify that revenue source as well. And also, there may be some technical amendments coming from the finance director. I believe that there's a slight change in the computation on the resolution that you have before you, and so there will be an amendment from a technical nature to amend that item, and the finance director will go over that with the board after you've solidified the contents of the final resolution, which adopts the tax levy for the 2020 budget. The Government Finance Officers Association defines a budget in 4 different ways. It's a policy document in that it is reflective of the constituents' desired level and type of service. And it encompasses the unique flavor of our locality. It is a policy document through the allocation of resources into various buckets or areas of service. Typically, local government looks at its service within 7 broadly defined categories, from public safety through health and human services and other categories, and those are all summarized in the budget documents. The budget's also an operations guide. It provides a direction on that policy so that at the departmental level, the wishes of the board can actually be implemented. And it makes that connection to our community, because we as an organization do not exist without the community we serve. It's our planning document. The budget is a summarization of prioritization, of much dialogue and discussion by the board, and it sets out a direction for an upcoming year. And it looks at our strategic plan and many other planning inputs. Throughout the year, the board may actually go through planning, whether it's land use planning or county forest planning. There are any number of different types of plans, all of which feed into the final budget document, because each one of those individually may call for investments in specific areas to move that plan forward. And your budget document becomes a document that summarizes all of those other plans, as well as the input from the community as a whole. It also considers the trends and the issues that are happening in the community and responds to them. It is also a communications device. It is a device that we use to provide additional transparency and accountability and information to our electorate. There are 2 components to the budget that are ways that we look at it. So you've got the operations piece of the budget, which is the day-to-day operations. It includes the operation of the jail. It includes land conservation. It includes all of those day-to-day types of activities that it takes to manage and run and provide services. And it has very specific funding sources that have to be renewable, meaning one-time only funds would not typically be used for operations, because every year those services need to be able to continue. One of the biggest challenges that we have in Eau Claire County is that levy limits have created a limit of either 0 or the percent of net new construction, which oftentimes is not adequate to meet the overall increases that we see from a pure inflationary standpoint. We also have a capital budget, and that is the budget where we invest in our infrastructure and we make longer-term investments. And we use this primarily at this point for funding for highway construction. In this budget, there is the replacement of light fixtures throughout our organization and moving to LED light fixtures for a year-over-year cost savings in the future, and the replacement of some of our major software systems. The summary of our budget: we have a budget that is $113 million in total. 9.5 million of that is capital investment. 35.8 million is property tax levy, and the remainder is from other sources, whether they be intergovernmental grants, aids, or fees, fines, and forfeitures, and the sales tax. The levy rate is at $4 and approximately 9 cents per thousand. which is only an increase of around, if you round it up, 3 cents per thousand this year with this budget as it is proposed, which is, for the average homeowner, $4.50. So about the price of a cup of coffee, maybe a little more, maybe it's cappuccino. But for that price, that's for an entire year of service and increased services in some areas. The property tax bill is made up of funding for not only county government, but our schools, the cities, and other local governments. 19 to 21%, depending upon the jurisdiction you live in, of that overall tax bill provides county government services. And finally, we have, with this proposed budget, 599 full-time equivalent employees, and the budget includes a 1% cost of living increase for employees. With our budget, we have what I would term a budget philosophy. We talk about this with the board at the start of the budget process. We talk about it with the Finance and Budget Committee. And there are some very specific areas that we seek when we pull the budget together to keep in mind so that our budget is one that we know is going to effectively address concerns that exist and honestly translate into future success as well. And so the orange letters, there's quite a bit of verbiage there, but the orange letters or words are those that are the key elements of each one of these statements. The first one being the financial and institutional stability. That is an objective that we strive for with each budget. And that means that mandated programs will continue to provide those. And we will do that as effectively as we can do that within our funding limits. We will also develop plans, especially our capital plan, based on not only need, but debt structure and debt limits. And again, the issue of funding continues to be something that we do look at. And we look at it from the standpoint not only of need, but it's the two pillars, the need and the financial impact, especially as it pertains to our overall financial condition with fund balance and cash. We fund preventative programs and services. They're really a cost abatement strategy. Typically, when you have a program that is effective in meeting a need, it actually lowers the overall cost for the local government or the one who is serving. And there are multiple programs that the county provides that do exactly that. And they prevent other problems down the road. Nutrient management is a land conservation program. It's preventative because it protects our groundwater. Our health programming, again, protects groundwater. They do restaurant sampling, and they maintain our POUTS, which is actually the rural septic system, again, protecting waterways. We have earlier responsive interventions in human services that are designed to be preventive in nature that include not only child welfare, but crisis services and behavioral health. And in the Criminal Justice Collaborating Council, they're working with our treatment courts and others to address the continued need to mitigate jail population and to hopefully even mitigate those who, instead of having them become part of that system, would be able to be diverted into other services with the Stepping Up program. Even those programs that are not mandated, if it's going to hold down costs elsewhere, we look at opportunities. We continue to look at ways that we can be innovative. And that is why we do continue to invest in information technology. And one example of that is the permitting and licensing software that is being installed that will allow individuals to actually obtain permits from planning and zoning with actually without having to come to this building to do that. That is an expectation that our citizens have, that they should be able to have easy access to the services. And it's also providing us with streamlined data entry and ease of use for our internal folks as well. The LED light replacement, it is expected to have a 3-year payback or return on investment for that. And we've had a number of areas where we have shared positions in the area of the surveyor, and that's with planning and development, and the highway department, as well as maintenance in the highway. We also look to pull together a budget that transitions to future budgets that actually are able to make sense. So knowing that on the operational side, we will have the ongoing funding in order to be able to continue to provide that service. We continue to work on this with the board and with our departments, and we're looking at 2020 as being a year of having additional discussion about priority issues and strategic planning. The county's physical assets, we have an intent to continue to properly and timely maintain those assets. And this is evident in this budget with our long-term maintenance plan for our infrastructure, that we actually have a number of items that are funded through this budget, and it addresses the immediate need for improvements to our existing highway facility. This chart that you see is actually part of your budget book. It is also on the web, and it has been emailed to you. But I will summarize very briefly what it says. It indicates that on a $150,000 home, which is the average cost of a home in Eau Claire County, that taxpayer will pay $613 approximately in property tax that provides for county services. When you look at our budget from a functional aspect, the largest single area, if you carve out debt, is actually the debt service, which is 31% of the overall budget. And again, that's funding some of our long-term infrastructure, whether it be buildings or roadways. Behind that is public safety, health and human services, and then general government. In the chart below, we've actually taken the debt and we've reallocated it to the different areas of service, whether it be public safety, transportation, general government. And when you look at that compilation, then public safety rises to the top, being the largest consumer of the property tax levy at 34.66%. And then, of course, transportation and health and human services follow after that. And that is the summary of the budget. You as a board will be going through it in more detail when the vice chair takes over for the discussion and dialogue of the board. Are there any questions at this point? Thank you.
Thank you. We will now proceed to the public hearing portion of our meeting. I have 5 names here. I'm going to call forward first Mary Pika Anderson and ask Dan Ziegler to stand ready to succeed her. So please identify yourself. Thank you.
Am I on? Okay.
You're on.
Hi, I'm Mary Pika Anderson, and I'm here to represent the L.A. Phillips Senior Center. Don't know if any of you have been there. Hopefully, when I'm done, you'll come visit us. I just wanted to, first of all, say that every year I look forward to coming to this event because we get the opportunity to thank you for the support that you've given the center in the past, as well as, of course, encourage you to continue to support the center in the future. Our role of the L.A. Phillips Senior Center is to be here in our community to provide services to help our aging population age wisely, actively, and grow independently. We know that the lifespan of this population is increasing, so we want to, at our center, provide programs that allow them to grow well and independently as they have those future years ahead of them. One of the two areas, though, that I will say that we work hard to connect with is probably two of the vulnerable areas of our senior population, and that is the low income and then the socially isolated seniors. We know that right now at our center, 70% of our members are women. 40% of those women live alone. They come to the center on the average twice a week and spend a minimum of 3 hours when they're there. It is the place that they come to gather with their friends or people of like interest. And with that in mind, we also know that this population is increasing. And if you haven't heard, we are currently in a capital campaign to increase the footprint of our facility because we have ran out of space. We ran out of space to provide programming for the population because they have such a variety of interests, whether it's to learn a new language or to get involved in an activity that helps them balance better, or nutrition programs. It is a large variety, all in which keeps them active. By keeping them active, we keep them healthy physically and mentally. So we have a challenge ahead of us to raise $1.1 million with a match grant from the Ellie Phillips Family Foundation. And our charge is to raise that by the mid-February of 2020. So if you have any extra dollars in your pocket, you can send it to, no, seriously, really, we love the population that we serve. I can honestly tell you that every day I look forward to going there because there's many stories. But most of all, I look at them and I have a deep appreciation because I realize the community that I live in today was basically built on their hard work. And they encourage me every day to be a hard worker so that I can build a community for the next generation to come. So thanks for your support. And if you ever have a free time, don't be afraid to stop in. They'll tell you absolutely what's going on.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Dan Ziegler, to be followed by Kay Olson.
Good evening. My name is Dan Ziegler, and I'm here on behalf of the Veterans of Foreign Wars, Post 7232. We want to take this opportunity to thank this governing body for its continued support of the Eau Claire County Veterans Tribute. As President Lincoln said, it is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. It is for us, the living, to dedicate the work for which our county's veterans sacrificed and served. The 4,000 living veterans and the thousands that have gone before them and their families and the ones that are still to serve deserve no less. Again, thank you.
Thank you. Next is Kay Olson, to be followed by Joe Heil.
Good evening. I'm Kay Olson. I live at 3228 Summerfield Drive here in Eau Claire. It was tough to decide tonight which hat to wear. I'm a veteran of 26 years. I'm a Gold Star mother. My son was killed in Iraq December 1st, 2005, and I'm our state president right now. Or other veterans organizations, American Legion, Purple Heart, I belong to all of those. Plus, I work with the Veterans Tribute right now. Is another one of my shoes. So it was kind of hard to decide what to wear, you know. I've been involved with the Eau Claire County Veterans Tribute Project, and I would like to take time and say thank you, a big thank you, to the county board for the support that you have shown for this very important project. I am very involved in many veterans organizations, as you could see in this county. I am sure that I am not alone in the feeling for the gratitude for all our other veterans, that you have supported all of the projects that we have requested or talked about. Again, I want to say thank you very much for your service, and God bless you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Joe Heil, to be followed by Diane Robertson.
Good evening. I'm Joe Heil. I've been a resident of Eau Claire County since 1978 when I moved here with my family. So I've been a long-time resident. I, too, would like to thank you for your support for the Eau Claire County Veterans Tribute. I'm also chairman of the Eau Claire County Veterans Council, so I'm kind of speaking not just for myself, but also for a lot of the veterans that can't be here tonight to say thank you for what you've done in the past, and hoping that you will continue to support the Eau Claire Veterans Tribute. In doing so, you're going to be recognizing the past veterans who have served our country, both men and women, also the future ones that are currently supporting and defending our country. Not only that, but what about the future veterans that are going to be coming down in 4 to 5, maybe 10 years from now? You're also going to be recognizing those ladies and gentlemen that will be serving our country so that we, as American citizens, can be free. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Diane Robertson.
Hi, my name is Diane Robertson. I'm a community member of the Human Services Board and have been for 10-plus years. The course that Human Services was on financially was unsustainable, both financially and with outcomes for individuals and families. They are taking a new tack, which is already showing promise. It's a program that's research-based, which other counties in Wisconsin have started with promising results. I just want to support what they're already doing, as well as the budget they're requesting, so that they can continue their work. Thank you.
Thank you. That was the last person who indicated a wish to speak. Is there any other member of the public who wishes to present comment? Any other member of the public? Anyone else who wishes to present comment? Our public hearing is now at a close. We will be moving into the budget deliberation. I point out to you that in your packet, you have a written report from the Corporation Council regarding the annual budget procedure, which you may want to have available to you. And at this time, in accordance with the county code, I call forward our vice chairperson to preside in the... Oh, sorry. That's a good thing that our county clerk is here to remind me, because I had moved the agenda item. I'm referring now to file 73, which you have in your packet. Sorry. File 73 is an ordinance to amend section 4.14, daily juvenile detention rate established. Motion? Motion by Supervisor Beckfield, second by Supervisor Neiman. Anyone who wishes to speak to the motion? Oh, sorry, excuse me, Supervisor Pagonis. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome back. It's my reading of the county code that anytime there's a fee adjustment, it has to come to finance and budget. We haven't seen this, and I'm not sure why it wasn't referred. I believe it's already been incorporated into the Human Services budget without any overview or review from finance. So I'm not sure whether it's out of order or not.
I have to consult with the Corp Council on that matter.
I will check on that and get back to that.
While he's checking on that, I'll proceed with any other discussion of this file. Is there any other discussion? Are there any other questions or comments? I don't. Well, this came out of Human Services Board. Supervisor Bates, do you wish to?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This particular adjustment was made in regard to looking at the fees that we charge for various responsibilities that are held by Human Services. And obviously, in our budget this year, we reviewed all of those fees. In determining and looking it over, it was determined that the fee could be adjusted to be somewhat higher and perhaps still be able to generate some revenue without causing undue concern for the individuals that are paying it.
Thank you. I think that we are stuck here because apparently, according to county code, fee adjustments come through budget and finance. Is that correct, Supervisor Pagonis?
That's my reading of it, and I would suggest Attorney Sullivan render some opinion on that.
And are you referring to 4.02050, which is the user fee schedules, or where?
Yes.
It does require that they go.
I'm sorry?
He said that.
It does it says the Committee on Finance and Budget shall annually review these user fees and recommend to the county board at its second meeting in October the enactment or amendment of user fee schedules for the ensuing fiscal year.
So where does that leave us in this?
Can't hear you.
Means it is not, if it hasn't gone to Finance and Budget, it's not in compliance with the code. That's what it leaves us with.
So we would have to, this is out of order.
Yes. Have to go back to Finance and Budget.
According to the Corp Counsel and to Supervisor Pagonis' opinion, this motion is out of order, therefore it is dead, it is killed. And we will have to consider how to take up this item in the future. Thank you.
Well, I think it can be referred to Finance and
Oh,
Budget.
I'm sorry.
Can't hear you.
I'm referring it to Budget and Finance.
Thank you.
Sorry. Okay. Now, at this time, our Vice Chair will come forward to preside.
Yep, I'm sorry. How about now?
Yeah, that looks like a little bit.
I can't. I know where there's more of those. I want.
Well, hopefully you will all have had the opportunity to study the budget book. It certainly contains a great deal of information in every single program, and you should have been able to read it with the help of a magnifying glass. Probably when they said it was a small budget, they weren't kidding. The print was really small, and I think for those of us who had access to see it online, that in some respect turned out to be a moment of salvation. In the first part of the budget book, as you are aware, there's a lot of information in regard to the budget itself, including some of the premises on which it was based. There are a number of amendments that have been offered to this particular document, and I would submit that we should take up one of them at this point in time because it's pertinent to the information that was given at the time that the initial information was put in here before you get to the department budgets. And so is there anyone wishing to bring forth an amendment in regard to that particular part of the budget at this point in time? Supervisor Neiman?
Madam Chair, I didn't understand what you said.
The amendments that were given to you in advance, the ones that are pertinent to the budget, I think can be handled two different ways. One of them is in regard to a policy statement that was before we get to the department budgets.
Two of them are in regard to policy statements.
And that's correct. And so, because I think that before we get into the department budgets themselves, this would be a good time to address those two issues.
Well, if I may, the proposed amendment number 1, at this time, I am withdrawing. It was presented by the Committee on Finance and Budget. I am asking to withdraw it. I intend to bring it back as a resolution on December 3rd so that I could provide additional information and a fact sheet. So I am withdrawing it from consideration. So your prior statement, there's only one, is correct.
Thank you very much. Then I believe, do you want to introduce that amendment, please?
Well, I put forth an amendment requesting the removal of policy statements made on the face sheet of the 2020 proposed budget, those be removed so that they could be placed on a future county board meeting agenda. My purpose for this request was to allow county board supervisors a chance to consider this very important consideration, so that there's plenty of time to think about this and then have enough time to discuss it as it fully deserves.
And so that's the explanation. Is there a motion to move this forward? And made by Supervisor Cronk, seconded by Supervisor Gatlin. Further discussion? Seeing none, would you please take... Excuse me, who am I missing? Okay, we'll get it yet. Supervisor Wilkie?
Yes, Madam Chair. Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. I would encourage you to vote no for this motion. The one has been withdrawn, and you'll get more details at your December meeting. This one is certainly a statement we should be including in our budget at this time, given our fiscal situation. It's not as if it's something new or creative. It's been a long-standing practice. At least 2 administrators frequently would speak to department heads, and when they come across an unanticipated item that blows up their budget, and every department has those kind of things that can happen to them, they're expected to mitigate. And this has been a practice done for years, but given the situation of our budget, felt that, and the committee felt unanimously, that it should be put in writing. Now, I will acknowledge that the vast majority of departments accept this practice, would accept this as a policy, and are doing it. And with or without it, I would hope they would do it. But I think we are at a time that we should put it in writing, as we have done in the budget book, endorse it, and essentially reaffirm it by this board. Quite frankly, I can't understand, given once you read that policy statement, and I think maybe the policy statement needs to be read here so the public and all of us are real clear what we're talking about, because I can't understand why you wouldn't support this. Please, somebody tell me the answer to that. I'd like to read.
Excuse me, I think we want to get back to the issue at hand and not debate the particular, where the issue here should be, should this come back to the board?
No, no, it's deleting it out of this budget, and I don't want it deleted out of this budget. And I think it's important that we know what we're considering deleting out of this budget and sending it, referring it, and then maybe bring it back to the board.
I think it needs to be a part of a budget during a very fiscally critical time, that we remind ourselves as supervisors and we remind all department heads. What is it that we're really talking about not wanting to have written in our budget book here? I'd like to read that, and then somebody can tell me why you can't adhere to this. Adhere to the budget is required by each county department. When the department becomes aware of a potential shortfall or a net deficit, the department must alert their oversight committee and the Committee on Finance and Budgets. Steps to mitigate and correct the shortfall must be taken immediately. The department is responsible for providing timely and accurate information regarding the shortfall, whether it is due to over expenditures or under realization of revenue, and the department must provide a mitigation strategy to correct the shortfall. Why wouldn't you want to do that?
Excuse me. Thank you for that comment. Also, now I'm going to call on Supervisor Pagonis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I probably should have done this before Supervisor Wilkie began talking, but I would like to amend Supervisor Neiman's amendment to change it from 2 policy statements to 1 policy statement, because given I'm withdrawing our prior amendment and to amend that first paragraph, we're actually eliminating that first paragraph at this time. So I'm asking to amend the amendment for the purposes of taking that paragraph out and only considering the second paragraph that Supervisor Wilkie was discussing.
And I just would like to weigh in on this a little bit too. One of the discussions we were just, well, I can't turn on my microphone.
It was on. Get closer. Oh, you just turned it off.
It says I have power.
Get closer.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you have to get closer.
Okay. One of the discussions we were having up here about the amendment number 1, that is the one that Supervisor Pagonis indicated that she wished to withdraw. She certainly can make a motion to withdraw that, but I think that there has to be approval by the board to withdraw it because it is at this point part of the budget document. If that's withdrawn, then we would deal with the issue of her motion to have an amendment to Supervisor Neiman's amendment is what we would do. Does that make sense?
And so what, I think, do you understand that?
No, actually I don't, because I presented an amendment that wasn't moved on this floor, so I'm not sure why there has to be a motion to withdraw my amendment.
Because it's already part of the budget document, and so it would be a motion to remove it from the budget document.
My amendment that I submitted subsequently to change the paragraph is what I'm withdrawing. My second.
So let's just be clear about what you're asking to withdraw.
Okay, I'm asking to withdraw amendment number 1.
Correct. And that's the one that's talking about, given the difficult fiscal condition of the county, and it limits the Department of Human Services as opposed to the entire, all the
Yes,
departments.
but it hasn't been moved on this floor, so I don't see why we have to vote on my ability to withdraw it.
It's to remove it from the budget document.
It's not in the budget document yet. Yes, it is.
It is in the budget document, because when it was submitted, it became part of the budget document.
He's saying this is part of the Nope, he's
So
not.
I think that what is being said here is that Supervisor Pagonis wishes to withdraw the amendment number 1, which would in effect leave the language as it was originally stated in the original budget document as it is.
Which is my second, my motion.
We're using the word amendments in 2 different ways here. Really and truly, it looks as though because this is in the budget document, there would have to be an amendment to remove amendment number 1 from the document.
I think it's a point of
Policy.
order. Point of order. My motion to amend Supervisor Neiman's amendment is, in fact, to make a motion to remove the paragraph from the budget document. My first request to withdraw the change to the paragraph in the budget document, I think is the prerogative of the Committee on Finance and Budget. It was put forth by Finance and Budget. It has not been incorporated into the budget. It was proposed. It hasn't been moved on. I should be able to withdraw it on behalf of the committee. My second request to amend Supervisor Neiman's amendment is to, at this point, remove that paragraph from the budget document so that we are only considering the second paragraph in the budget document. Two separate things.
So in any event, you would not be considering any of the language, whether it's Department of Human Services
Yes.
or any department?
Yes. So the first one is withdrawing my amendment. The second one is a request to withdraw this paragraph that we would have to vote on. It's my motion to withdraw that.
There is a motion on the floor already.
I
And
was
so-
making an amendment to that motion.
And so,
Vote on the amendment.
so basically, then you're making an amendment to that motion
Yes.
to withdraw the portion of the policy that's there that you had
Yes.
submitted.
Correct. I'm making a motion to withdraw this paragraph, and I am amending the current amendment on the floor because it asks to consider 2 policy statements. I want to withdraw, I want to delete one of the policy statements. So I'm making a motion to delete that policy statement by asking for an amendment to the amendment.
I'll have the clerk read the portion of this policy statement that would be withdrawn with the amendment that Supervisor Pagonis is making.
Cronk and Gatlin made a motion to remove the 2 policy statements that are in the budget book. It's on the first page. It's not a numbered page. It is a letter from the Committee on Finance and Budget and the 2 statements. Do you want me to read the full statements?
Read.
This will be
Shirley, read
removing,
the both
motion is to remove both of
statements,
these.
and then that would be what the first motion did, was to remove both statements. Read those.
The first statement is, given the current difficult fiscal condition of the county, effective upon the adoption of the 2020 budget, all current and future vacant positions in the county are placed on hold, pending review of the position by the county administrator, the oversight committee of the department requesting the position, the Human Resources Committee, and the Committee on Finance and Budget. If the position is denied by any of the above, the Oversight Committee may bring the position request to the County Board of Supervisors for consideration. The second policy is, adherence to the budget is required by each county department. When a department becomes aware of a potential shortfall or a net deficit, the department must alert their Oversight Committee and the Committee on Finance and Budget. Steps to mitigate and correct the shortfall must be taken immediately. The department is responsible for providing timely and accurate information regarding the shortfall, whether it is due to over-expenditures or under-realization of revenue, and the department must provide a mitigation strategy to correct the shortfall. So the motion on the floor is to remove both of those statements, 2 policy statements from the budget book.
And I'm moving an amendment to the amendment.
An amendment to that would mean this language would be removed.
I'm asking to have one of the elements
Amendment.
removed.
Correct.
Can you read that now?
And it's the first policy statement, correct? So it's
Yes,
the one
correct.
regarding
Given the
the
difficult fiscal
vacant position
I
one.
got it. I'm on it.
What is her?
Need to have a second to that motion.
What is
And there has been a motion to remove that
not
portion
an amendment.
from the original motion.
That's right.
Is there a second to that? And there was a second made by Kevin Stelgis, Supervisor Stelgis.
And your amendment, Stella, is the written amendment that was presented to the board in the budget, or the
Yes.
packet?
Yes,
As part of the October 15th letter?
yes.
Okay.
And do you want to read that once more so that people are really sure about what's being removed?
She's amending it, so I have to find that amendment. So Stella, your amendment is to remove the first policy statement regarding given the current difficult fiscal condition.
Yes.
And the vacant positions being placed on hold.
Yes.
It is
And
the first
that's what I
paragraph.
indicated.
If you need me to read it, and it's removing that from the budget book.
It's to remove that one paragraph from the budget book, and it's, as I stated earlier, it's my intent to bring a resolution on December 3rd where we would be able to provide a fact sheet to provide essential information regarding this. So in essence, I'm agreeing with Supervisor Neiman that this needs to be more fully discussed. I'm not asking to remove that second paragraph that Supervisor Wilkie was speaking to.
Okay.
Stella, or Supervisor Pergonis's amendment, which she's asking to remove, which she's presenting, is really adding the language of Department of Human Services, which is not what's in the book.
That was my first amendment that I've withdrawn. And
Nothing was presented to the board, so there would have been nothing to withdraw. I mean, in writing it was there, but there was nothing presented on the floor with a motion.
Okay. But now she wants to withdraw that paragraph.
Okay. Let me try and explain this.
Get closer to your microphone, please.
Let me try and explain. Turn my, so, we have the motion made by Supervisor Neiman that the two policy statements be removed and placed at a future county board meeting for further deliberation. So the amendment that is being proposed by Supervisor Pagonis is that it be the first policy statement, that giving the positions, be removed, and that at this point, it would only be one as opposed to two. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So the end result of that would be is that if the board were to approve that amendment, that first statement in the October 15th letter would be removed as a policy statement.
Correct.
That would make the amendment number one that she had previously submitted and asked the court to remove or withdraw, that would become moot at that point, and so no longer would need to be considered. And then once that is voted upon, the board will go forward from there.
I guess I have a question. Then if indeed this motion brings it back to the board at the next meeting.
This one doesn't. This second
That's not what this does. I have to bring the resolution. I would bring a resolution. My plan is
But
to
you
bring a
would be
resolution.
bringing a resolution back to the board at the next meeting.
Correct.
And what's left is Martha, Supervisor Neiman's motion would also be coming back to, how is that?
No. If the amendment is approved, only one of the policy statements is removed. And the other policy statement, we still need to deal with. We still have to vote on.
All right. We have an amendment. We have a second to the amendment, and the amendment is what you would be voting on. So please take your keypads.
Should we get discussion?
Yes.
Okay.
If there's further discussion, I'm sorry, I didn't see anyone. Supervisor Boerboom.
Thank you. Could I ask each of the supervisors, Neiman and Pagonis, to restate the intention behind each of their amendments? I'm not really clear on their intention behind these.
Well, we're actually, at this point, we're only discussing the amendment by Supervisor Pagonis. And so would you care to address her issue, please?
I'm happy to. I'm happy to, thank you. So Supervisor Beerbohm, there's a paragraph in the October 15th letter that's the first page of your budget book, and that paragraph starts with, given the current difficult fiscal condition of the county. Essentially, I agree with Supervisor Neiman that it needs to have a bigger discussion and not be part of this budget book. It needs to have additional background information. So I am asking to have that paragraph withdrawn from this page, and that as we would move forward, it would only be Supervisor Neiman's amendment would be to focus on the second paragraph regarding adherence to the budget.
Thank you.
Supervisor Leary?
I'm very sorry. I had pressed that on an earlier item, so please subtract it.
Supervisor Maury?
Yes. I think this just shows us that even though a budget deliberation and amendments and all that is a policy statement, policy shouldn't be not part of the budget deliberation. We really need to have full board review of policy changes, ample public input into those. And I can think of numerous examples of things that got inserted into a budget bill in the middle of the night and then became policy changes. One is the social work training certificate, which gives a backdoor approach to social workers to become professionally licensed, but it's not a good idea because they don't have adequate training. And even though that's been improved, they're also not mobile. They can't leave the state and practice anywhere else in the country as a social worker. I think we've also recognized that there's a radical new approach to how things are being done in human services. Things are changing. August saw a reduction in the total cost for alternate care for the first time in many, many months. We also heard from Todd Romanesco, Calumet County Administrator and a former Human Services Director, that we have a variety of legally mandated services in human services, and the revenues and state aids are small and not adequate to meet the demands and needs of families.
This is to remove the paragraph from the page.
Right. I am speaking against the amendment because I would like to see both of them removed. And I think that, we haven't had adequate discussion. Finance and Budget Committee met on 2 Mondays recently and discussed these policy changes and inserted them in the budget, and nobody from Human Services was present. We weren't invited, we didn't know about it, and there was even public reporting that did not give a fair and balanced review of the issue because the Human Services perspective was not there. So I would like to speak against this amendment and support well, we'll go back to the main motion eventually, but.
Supervisor Coffey.
Thank you. I agree with Supervisor Maury. I think that one of the difficulties I have in the last paragraph Supervisor Wilkie was speaking about is that the department must alert Oversight Committee and the Committee on Finance.
Madam Chair, we're talking about the first paragraph. Let's talk about on the amendment, please. Madam Chair, point of order.
That is the first paragraph.
I believe that is the first paragraph.
That is the second paragraph. I want them both to go to, just like Martha was talking about.
And I guess your point is that you're not supporting the amendment by Supervisor Pagonis.
Right.
Supervisor Anderson.
The question I would have is, should the amendment on the floor pass, then the amended amendment we would be voting on whether or not to include the second paragraph.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Dunning.
Well, I think that we need to remember that by voting on the amendment, what we're scheduled to do would only take care of the first amendment, and then the next one, the next half of Supervisor Neiman's amendment would be then voted upon, on the remaining paragraph. So we will have two votes coming up on this, one to adjust, to look at the first paragraph, and then if that, whether it passes or fails, we still look at the remaining amendment. The one paragraph or two paragraphs, whatever's left. So there still is the option to vote on both.
That's correct.
And I think that's what I was said about a half hour ago.
Yep.
Okay. And so is there anyone else wishing to speak? Supervisor Smyer.
I request that the question be called.
Thank you. And so the question has been called. Individuals, please take your keypad and vote on the amendment 2 that was proposed by Supervisor Pagonis to remove one portion of the amendments that were offered. Oh, I'm sorry.
25 yes, 3 noes. 25 yes, 3 noes.
And so the amendment passes? And let's go now back to the original motion.
As amended.
As amended ones. Further discussion? Please take your keypads. This would leave the remaining language.
You have to have discussion as amended.
Discussion on the further motion. Could you clarify this further?
Or do you want me to?
The motion was to remove both policy statements. It's been amended now. The motion was to remove both policy statements. It's been amended now because the first policy statement has been removed, and so what you're voting on is its removal of the second policy statement.
Point of order.
Please.
And also referral of that item to a future meeting. That's part of the...
Yes, that's correct.
And so I have Supervisor Wilkie.
Start over again.
You got to turn his microphone on.
Mike's not on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Now speaking for the first time to the motion as amended. But answering questions when it was spoken to before. This is not something that's a back door. You can't be coming in the back door if you've been doing this practice for 30 years or more. And I'm wondering, you know, I read the statement earlier. What is it you fear? What is it you're afraid of? Is there an intent that you don't want your departments to abide by this? Is it the intent that you want to give them a green light? It's okay, blow over your budget? Because that's the message you'll be sending if you vote for this amendment as amended. So I would encourage you to think long and hard. This is not something out of the ordinary. It's just putting in black and white a policy statement. a practice that has been going on 30-plus years in this county. Two previous administrators said it many times over to department heads. And I suspect, and will not speak for our current administrator, may well have done this with department heads and have spoken to them about mitigate within your department. I think you should hear from her if, in fact, this is a sound practice. We're just putting it in writing. Is it, do you have an intent that you want to blow over your budget, or you're just going to ignore the budget? As governing committees, I would hope not. I've seen during the budget process or this fiscal year, certain departments already doing this. The highway department, horrible snowfall. They're digging down deep in other areas where they can control their budget to do that. So there is nothing in this statement that's inappropriate, new. It should be totally and absolutely endorsed by this board. If we don't, I can't understand why you would object to this. I thought it was a pretty straightforward statement. Minimal, bare minimum, we should be doing as a board. Our number one responsibility, above all, that has to come first, is our fiduciary responsibility. Without that, nothing comes after it. If we can't abide by this, you just switched a green light onto every department head and said, ignore your budget. Because that's all this is saying is pay attention to your budget. When you've got a budget problem, make every good faith effort to correct it, to mitigate it. Tell me what's wrong with that.
Thank you for those comments. Supervisor Moritz?
Yes, I'll make a comment, and this is kind of a question for the previous supervisor to, if he asks what may be wrong with it, I would like to make certain that this is not what's wrong with it. It says in there to take steps to immediately mitigate, which is good. They should do that. But am I correct that it is not required to resolve it completely financially? For example, if there's really a lot of snow and they really don't have enough money in the highway budget, is the highway guy, the head of the highway commission, supposed to start firing people? In other words, I understand we should take steps to mitigate it, but there may be a time when it is not mitigatable within that budget. And that's the only concern I have with this. Am I overreacting?
No, if that's a question to me, I have to chair.
Yes, it is.
I will answer it. No, I see your point, and nowhere's in there does that say that.
Right.
And that's the
Excuse
point.
me, this can't
There'll
be a
budget times that
conversation.
you'll blow
May I
over.
suggest that we go through usual protocol?
Sorry, I apologize.
Supervisor Neiman, I have you next.
Well, I would like to stand by the motion that I have made, the amendment that I've made. In my experience with this, working on the board, I have never, ever gotten the slightest indication that the staff involved were blowing over and ignoring their budget in any way. The problems were recognized and addressed. I think it's important for these kinds of things to have deliberation and not have this be a statement that's locked into the budget. And I totally resonate with Supervisor Moritz's point.
Thank you. Supervisor Anderson.
The statement I'd like to make is that I don't disagree with the content of the statement at the beginning of the budget, and that to me the content isn't of what's in question, but it's how the specific wording of the policy can be read and interpreted. I can't point my finger at a specific part or function of the policy, but when I read it and when the amendment came up again, I was reminded of when I read it initially and was struck with a feeling similar to as if you smell smoke. That doesn't necessarily mean there's a fire or there's a danger, but it was the feeling of perhaps this should be investigated further. So I would support removing this in order to give it more time and space to be addressed and examined.
Thank you. Supervisor Pagonis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The paragraph that's put in here in my mind is, well, of course we would do this. Of course we have a budget. Of course the departments are expected to work within an adherence of their budget. And of course the oversight committees would be notified if there's an issue. That's already the practice. There is no consequence that's included in this paragraph. What it's asking is information needs to be provided, and part of that information is what is the strategy to correct things. There are some things that are clearly not correctable. So if revenues are down for some reason, for a reason we don't understand, we need to be notified about that, and we need to look at how could the department still work within their budget. This isn't a core statement. Without a statement like this, why would we even have the budget? We would just have a free-for-all. Anyone can do anything they want. We have a budget as a policy because that's what we expect the departments to do, and we expect the departments to adhere to their budgets. And we've heard this in the oversight committees that I have been on, not only on finance, but on judiciary and law. We've heard repeatedly from the directors who come in that it's important to them that they adhere to their budget, and they have talked about that. So in my mind, this is something that is part and parcel of any budget. We expect the departments to adhere to their budget. So I'm struck that it's even controversial. Any one of us with a home budget, a family budget, we have so many expenditures, we have so much revenue, we have to work it out. If something goes haywire, we have to adjust accordingly. That is what this is asking all of the departments within the county to do.
Supervisor McKinney.
Oh, thank you. I think part of the problem for me is the language. And because as I really read again this and listened to the discussion, to me it reads as though it's taking all power and control away from all the various boards and committees in doing their budget work and giving total power and control to finance and budget. And that doesn't feel right. So I'm seeing why this is an issue that's being debated. Thank you.
Supervisor Crown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess for the reason of why we're having questions and why we're having debate, it's not that I'm necessarily questioning the intention of Supervisor Pagonis's explanation or Supervisor Wilkie's explanation, but I also consider Supervisor Moritz's concern, which are my concerns as well, and the same with Supervisor Anderson. So for me, it's not that I disagree with it, but I do think that it needs more discussion. So I would be more in favor of it coming to a later meeting. And I also think about policy statements. If we're looking at making policy statements for our budget, there's lots of policy statements I would like to see. I would like to see every department have an equity statement that's brought forward. What is their equity plan for future budgets? And that's not included in here. So I think this needs more discussion. Thank you.
Supervisor Henning.
This brings everything back to fairness. It applies to all departments, not just one. And we got to where we are tonight by going through the process, which included finance and budget. All this does is if somebody has problem with, no matter what group it is, somebody's going to try to help them correct it. It would go back to finance and budget, but then it would go to the county board. There's nothing hiding here. It's just doing things right.
I don't have anyone else that is wishing to speak here.
This person.
I just did.
Mr.
Nick.
Oh,
I'm sorry. I don't know. It's because I was looking at Bates.
Supervisor Smyre.
Sorry about
I'm sorry about that, but your thing will be up here, that's why your keyboard thing, so you will have to raise your hand if you want
May
to
I?
speak. Sorry.
Yes, please.
Thank you. I speak in favor of the amendment simply because, and I think many of you have heard me say this, I absolutely agree with the statement in this paragraph. However, I think that if we make it part of this budget, it makes it a part of this budget, not a policy. I would prefer to see this come before the board for discussion and inclusion in our financial policy and/or our county code, where we describe the responsibilities of each of the committees, rather than set it into this budget, which is applied only to this coming year. Let's make this part of county code or financial policy. I'm not sure which, but I absolutely agree with the content of that, because I think this enables the Committee on Finance and Budget to do its job, which is to have some oversight over what's happening and to have a heads up when there's some problem in the particular departments that the Finance and Budget is going to have to deal with in the end anyway. So I support the amendment, and I would wish to see this have a more permanent home. I agree with Supervisor Wilkie, it's been the practice, but the problem is a practice is not a requirement. It's just a custom. I would prefer to see this set into policy or code, whichever works. Therefore, I speak in favor of the amendment.
Supervisor Bauer-Broom.
This might be a little off topic, but I was just wondering if there's any extra additional information about the history of this. Like, is it typical to have it in every single budget? Or is this the first year that this is in it, or?
I don't know that there has been this type of a statement within the budget, but obviously, as you can see, this type of discussion takes a significant amount of consideration, research, data, and so forth. So I can't answer your question. Supervisor Leary?
Thank you, Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to speak. I understand where Supervisor Neiman is coming from, and I appreciate the discussion. I think it's important that we have this discussion, but I'm going to be opposing your amendment. I figure it's going to pass, but my point here is, with Supervisor Pagonis with the other portion of the policy statement with the intent to bring it back, I think both of these paragraphs need to be discussed. I think we need to have a really good discussion and set our policy as a board. I don't think we need to rush this necessarily to the next meeting. I think we need to have referrals to appropriate committees so that when we as a board take action on policy, everybody understands what it means. Frankly, we've spent a lot of time tonight. What are we talking about? In fact, that one of the 3 no votes on the amendment to the amendment, I'm sorry I got confused. Mine should have been a yes. So if our county clerk would mind changing my no vote to a yes on that other one, I would appreciate it. Let's move on and vote and get to the budget.
Thank you. Supervisor Wilkie?
I would suggest you could do both very easily. It can be a part of this budget, which I think sends a clear, consistent signal that always has been in place, as has been said in practice. I do agree with Supervisor Smyre that it should be put into our code, because this is only for this budget year, but we certainly can do both. There's nothing that prevents that. I would suggest you oppose the amendment.
Thank you. I have no one else wishing to speak. So would you please take your keypads Do you need the motion clarified?
Yes.
All right.
What you would be voting on is the removal of the second policy statement in the budget book, and it's regarding the adherence to the budget is required by each county department. When a department becomes aware of a potential shortfall or net deficit, the department must alert their oversight committee and the Committee on Finance and Budget. Steps to mitigate and correct the shortfall must be taken immediately. The department is responsible for providing timely and accurate information regarding the shortfall, whether it is due to an over expenditure or an under realization of a revenue, and the department must provide a mitigation strategy to correct the shortfall. A yes vote would be to remove that policy statement.
Read that part too.
It's not in there. It's not in here.
Thank you. And now does everybody understand what this vote is for?
This is what the voting.
And her,
Please, Supervisor Smythe.
If we vote this amendment in, and this paragraph is not in the budget, and then at a later point in this year, in a month or two, if we vote this in as policy, it becomes effective immediately, correct?
When it's voted in.
Yes.
Right.
Yes,
All right. Thank you.
so should I read that?
yes. 'Cause the rest
Supervisor
of-
DeLuca, does that help you?
When I read that, I read it out of the budget book, but Supervisor Neiman did provide a written amendment that was in your budget packet, and it also said, be removed and placed on a future county board meeting agenda for further deliberation. Now, when she made this amendment, it was talking about both policy statements, but you've already made an amendment to reduce it to just the one policy statement regarding the overage in budgets. So yes would mean removing that from the policy from the budget book.
Please take your iPads and vote. Supervisor Gatton? It passed, 17 to 11. Now, I do believe we can get on to the process of the budget. We'll start in your budget book on the Committee on Administration, the administration budget, and that is in your book on page 49 through 52. That lists all of the department mission and strategic issues, and the budget is divided by programs. And are there any questions? Supervisor Pagonis, do you wish to speak to this budget?
Madam Chair, I thought you and I talked about this, and we were going to start by reviewing page number 17. I thought we had an agreement. We talked about it.
Okay, yes, you're correct. And so basically, would it be all right after we finish the administration budget to go back to page 17?
Sure.
Already. Are there any questions in regard to the administration budget? Any comments? If none, then I would like us...
Comments. Madam Chair, we talked about this. We agreed that you were going to let me talk to the different elements of the budget.
Yes, I thought since I'd already introduced the administration budget, we'd finish that, then go back to page 17.
But I have a comment. I have comments.
If you wish to go back to page 17.
No, ma'am, I have comments on the administration budget.
I'm sorry, then I was confused. I thought you were speaking about the page 17 issue. But please, the chair recognizes Supervisor Pagonis to speak to the administration budget.
Thank you. I just wanted to note a couple of things, that there was a pretty substantial decrease in tax levy in the administration budget. in the approximate amount of $88,000. Part of that is a social media person who is now in the IS department. Otherwise, I don't think there is very, in terms of expenditures, there is a discrepancy that I can't remember. I'm on page 50. But there was some additional revenue that came in, and I don't know, maybe Chairman Smyer remembers, but what I think is notable about this is a decrease in the tax levy because of one person having moved out.
Thank you. Any other questions in regard to that budget? If not, then Supervisor Pagonis, would you like to go back to page 17 in the budget book and just do that overview?
Well, I think it's important. I think it's important for this body to understand that what they're really voting on ultimately is what our tax levy is going to be. And I'm on page 17. This is the page that I would say best describes it. So right towards the center of the page, it shows that the 2019 payable allowable levy is $23,169,000. Our ability to increase the levy for 2019 is just 1.9% due to new construction. So I'm on page 17. So we have a very small amount of increase, allowable increase in our levy. And I think it's important that everyone understand that. The other adjustments to the levy are all designated. They're not things that we can use for other things, as it were. So that the adjustment for the debt service is basically paying down our debt. The adjustment for the library has to do with the library allocations. And then this year in particular, there's a particularly generous highway bridge aid of $250,000. Last year it was only $50,000. But those are adjustments to the levy. So our only levy that we have for each department to use is that $23,405. And I think it's important that everyone understands that. If you turn the page, it will just show you what happens to the total levy, what happens to our mill rate. As Administrator Schauf pointed out recently, it's a 2-cent increase per thousand. So that's basically where we are going with this. That is what we ultimately vote on, is what we're going to levy. So the rest of this budget is how we allocate that levy among departments. Thank you.
Thank you. With that in mind, I will proceed forward. The next budget in your budget book is the ADRC budget. It is on pages 53 through 61. Are there any questions? Any questions in regard to the Aging and Disability budget?
I just have one comment.
Supervisor Pagonis?
Yeah, I just have one comment. There was a concern about, there's some 3C dollars from the ADRC. Those are nutrition dollars that were going to the Augusta Senior Center in the amount of $7,758. Due to a mix-up, it seemed as though that amount was going away. It was not allocated to the Augusta Senior Center, but we were alerted and it has been restored, so it's not an issue. This is independent of the community agencies. So it was a big concern. The $37,000 that the Augusta Senior Center gets from Eau Claire County represents about 48% of its entire budget. So unlike the L.A. Phillips, where the $30,000 they get from the county is just really a pretty small percentage, for Augusta, it's huge. So I just in case anybody was worried about it, which I'm
there.
guessing nobody was.
Thank you for that information. Are there any other questions in regard to the ADRC? I'm not seeing any, so we'll move on to the airport budget. And basically, do you want to add anything here, Supervisor Pagonis?
No, Supervisor Moritz is on the commission, though he may have some
Correct.
comment.
Our representative is Supervisor Moritz. Do you have any questions or comments?
No.
Thank you. Moving on, the next budget that we have is the budget for child support. And that budget is in your book on pages 67 through pages 70. That particular budget oversight is done by the Administration Committee. Supervisor Pagonis, do you have anything to add to that budget? Or Supervisor Smyer?
The only thing that I was going to comment on, and Attorney Sullivan would be aware of this, there's a slight increase in the tax levy as a result of a transfer of a contract from the clerk of courts. The child support agency gets a substantial amount of reimbursement, and so it seemed expedient to transfer that. The other thing that's notable, and I think it's worth mentioning, the child support workers have caseloads of 700 to 800 cases each. The assistant head of the child support agency has a half load. The head of the child support agency carries a quarter caseload. So every member of this department carries caseloads. And I think it's important to recall when we start looking at departments that have multiple layers of management that don't carry caseloads. In this particular department, everyone is carrying a caseload, and I think that's important to keep in mind.
Thank you. And there's another thing that might be mentioned here, and that is that the money that would be lost because of some current legislation, the WCA is lobbying to put that back into their budget for the state level. Going on, the next budget that we have is the budget for the Criminal Justice Collaborating Council. Page,
Circuit Courts.
Oh, excuse me, Circuit Court. I jumped right over it. And does anyone have any questions in regard to that budget? It's on pages 71 through 74. Seeing there are no questions, we'll move on to the Criminal Justice Collaborating Council. Page 75 through 80. I'm not seeing any questions in regard to that budget. Onward to the Clerk of Courts budget, pages 81 through 84. And Supervisor Pagonis?
Thank you. If you, on page 82, if you'll note that under the revenue in 2019, they budgeted, under public charges for services, they budgeted $512,000, and they estimate getting in almost $580,000. And then on fines and forfeitures, they budgeted $290,000, and they're estimating receiving $543,000. I'm going to address the fines and forfeitures first. The dramatic increase in fines and forfeitures in this budget is a result of the state debt collection. And so it was the first year of the state debt collection, so just people were being notified that their debts to the county were in collections, and so many people paid as a result of that. What happened in finance and budget, the clerk of the circuit courts went back to her original numbers, maybe a little bit higher in the fines and forfeitures, But what happened in Finance and Budget was that Finance and Budget increased speculatively the public charges to $549,000 and the fines and forfeitures to $500,000. So essentially, about $100,000 increase. The point behind that was to use that. We're hopeful that we'll have that additional funding. It essentially reduces the clerk of court's levy by $100,000, and that was part of what was being used to fund the 3 additional correctional officers that we needed to find funding for. To get the 4, we were funding for 3. So that's a pretty dramatic change in this budget, and we're feeling pretty confident that they're pretty aggressive at getting the forfeitures, and so I think that I'm feeling very positive about that. But in case anybody's wondering where the dollars are coming from for the correctional officers, that's $100,000 of it.
Supervisor Cronk, please.
Thank you. I just had a quick question I'm hopeful can be answered. So for fines and forfeitures, and some of this is with clerk of courts and some of this is back with child support, but I realize there's the intergovernmental connection agreement. Thank you. For fees or fines that aren't paid, or for child support that isn't paid that's attempted to be collected, what is the interest rate? Is there an interest rate, and if so, what is the interest rate charged?
Well, that wouldn't go to the child support agency. That goes to the parent who's due the money.
Okay.
The interest rate, and the interest rate is 1% per month.
Okay, is that for unpaid? That's for child support. What about if there's a fine or a fee that's not paid? Is there interest that's charged?
Child support doesn't impose fines or fees, or they charge fees for various services, but
Tim,
they charge them up front.
She's talking about fees, fines, and forfeitures for citations and other things that go through the clerk of courts.
Okay, that has nothing to do with child support.
Right. It's independent of child support. She
Right.
had a dual question.
It was a dual question.
Okay.
I was asking for both. And you said it's 1%.
As far as the clerk of court, I'm not sure what the actual percentage rate is. I'm assuming it's 12%.
12?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Blumberg.
So 100,000 of the fines and forfeitures is going to the correctional officers, right? Supervisor Paconis? Is that what you had said?
It's a combination increase in, so it doesn't show this in the budget book. It should have under the proposed line, but basically what that column should say is the tax levy is $446,270. The public fee charges for services would be $549, and the fines and forfeitures would be $500,000. And so it would be the additional $100,000 in the combination of public charges and fees, fines, and forfeitures. So two sections there.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. We've already taken care of the explanation on page 85. It gives you an idea of what the communication budget is. So we'll move on to the community agencies, and there are a plethora of them. The explanation of what they do and their requests run from page 87 through 137.
Could you just point out a few changes?
Excuse me?
I said I would like to point out a few changes on page 86.
If you, as you bring up the changes, if you give the page number so they can follow.
Yep,
I think that
everything's
would
on
be
page 86.
just fine.
Okay. I just want to point out that there was a decrease in the Economic Development Corporation from 40,000 to 20,000. They had been at 88,000 for quite a few years as a result of a fund balance after a sale of a parcel of property on Highway 93, and by I assume by ordinance, it was required to go into the fund balance for economic development. That fund balance has been depleted. Then Bolton Refuge House, Interfaith Hospitality Network, and Sojourner House each received between $2,500 and $3,000 increase in levy dollars. So what you'll see is you have to look at what was in the 2019 budget and the finance and budget recommendation. And so those three agencies received a little bit more. And then unfortunately, Paul Bunyan Camp did not get their report in, and their request in a timely fashion, so they didn't get anything. I think otherwise everything else is unchanged. RPC is by contract, so I think that's. Valley Media Works was taken out because it is now part of the IS budget. I forgot that one. So that's all of the community agencies. And I think I've talked to this committee, this board before, that we really view certainly the prevention and community programs as prevention programs for the county. They're really helpful. And I was very concerned about Positive Avenues because it's not on this list, but I've been assured that Positive Avenues was funded through the Department of Human Services.
That's correct. Thank you. Thank you for that explanation. And then now we'll move forward to the Corporate Council budget. Oversight Committee is administration, and Tim Sullivan, of course, is our Corporate Counsel. Are there any questions in regard to the Corporate Council's budget? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next budget, and is the County Board's budget. Page 144 through 146. Supervisor Pagonis, please.
I think it's notable to point out the dramatic increase in expenditures. We have an increase in expenses of an increase of $15,000 from $16,000 to $32,000, and then an increase in the per diems from almost $36,000 to $63,000. So I know there was a big debate not long ago about wanting to get more per diems, and there it is in the budget. So I just wanted to point it out.
Thank you. Any other questions on that budget? Seeing none, then we will move to the County Clerk's budget. Janet Loomis is our County Clerk, page 147 through 150. Supervisor Pagonis, please.
Yeah, there's a particularly large increase in supplies and expenses between 2019 and 2020. It's a $51,000 increase, and that's a result of having 4 elections during 2020. We're going to have a February, an April, an August, and a November election. There's anticipation of very high turnout. And so what that increase really is for is obtaining the ballots.
Thank you. Are there any questions in regard to that budget? Seeing none, we'll move on to the District Attorney's budget, page 151 through 154. And Gary King is our District Attorney. Are there any questions in regard to the District Attorney's budget? Seeing none, we will move on to Extension. The University of Wisconsin Extension, pages 155 through 149. Tammy Schroff-Nagel is the chair of that committee, and Catherine Emanuel is the district or area director.
Madam Chair.
Supervisor Pagonis, please.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I would like to hear from Supervisor Schroff-Nagel, because when we met with the Extension people, we were somewhat alarmed that they're down a parent educator and the agriculture educator. Both of them were longtime employees of Extension, and I'm wondering if we can get an update from Supervisor Schroff-Nagel.
Supervisor Schroffnickle, would you like to answer that?
Sure. The egg educator, Mark Hagedorn, has taken a position with Extension on a statewide making him the egg educator, who all other county egg educators are able to ask questions and learn policy and be mentored into Extension the way that has been happening with professionals. If you remember back in the days of Malin Peterson, he was an egg educator, but he was also our swine specialist for the state of Wisconsin. And Brooke Berg also was promoted on a statewide basis, and we are now going through the process of getting that job posted, and hopefully within a couple of months we'll have a new person there. A week ago Friday, we interviewed for an egg educator, and I'm hoping we had several good candidates, and I'm hoping we'll have good news as far as someone accepting and stepping into that position.
Thank you for that information. Does that answer your concern?
Yes, somewhat. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So the next budget that we have, I see no other questions on Extension, so we'll move on to Facilities. Matt Tyson is our director in that area, and that committee reports to administration. Are there any questions in regard to the facility budget? Seeing none, we will move on to the Finance Department. And find that on page 164 through 167. Supervisor Pagonis, do you have anything to add here?
On finance?
Yes.
No.
Thank you.
No offense, but it's kind of a boring department.
Thank you for that. Thanks, Norm. The next budget in your budget book for your review is the Highway Department. Health Department, sorry about that. I gotta stop flipping pages here.
Madam Chair, I have a quick comment, just an explanation.
And on the Health Department budget, do you have anything to add?
I just will have an explanation, I think, just for the benefit of some of the new people, because sometimes it can be complex. The City County Health Department is a collaboration, and it's pretty much all tax levy, and the way the tax levy is determined is based on a percentage of equalized value. So the city pays somewhat higher amount towards the health department than the county does, because the county pays for everything that isn't part of the city of Eau Claire. And it's all based on the equalized value of the areas. That's it.
Are there any other questions in regard to the Health Department budget? Seeing that, Supervisor Neiman, I know that you serve on that committee.
I would just like to add to what Supervisor Pagonis says, that the levy actually comprises only about half of the Board of Health income. The staff does work very, very hard to gather other sources of revenue to meet the needs and the shortfall. Probably one of the greatest things this year is that the Center for Disease Control gave a grant for diabetes and heart care prevention. So it's a very preventive program that should help. One of the downsides is that the Drug-Free Communities grant ends this year and is not renewable. It's been part of the Board of Health budget for the last 10 years, but now we'll need to find other sources. So they're working hard.
Thank you for that information. Any other questions? Supervisor Cronk.
I'm sorry, I had this marked and now I can't find where I marked it. I guess I'm asking, there was a note kind of in the summary in the beginning about the City County Health Department and also here during the deeper department, kind of with all of the listings. And there, I guess my question for the nurse family partnership, there was a comment in here about, you know, the prevention and what happens if that case management isn't provided, but it was also saying that the case management isn't at full capacity because of funding. And so I'm curious, and I know there may not be an accurate number, but I'm wondering what full capacity would look like. What would that require to have it at full capacity? What type of funding?
Is there anyone here that can answer that question? I'm not sure. The assistant director is here. Can you add to the information? Why don't you come up and use one of the microphones right near you there? In fact, if you go to Supervisor Neiman's, she can share.
All right, good evening. My name is Marissa Stanley. I'm the Assistant Director for the Health Department. I do not have specific numbers for that. One of the things... You can stand up. In terms of being at full capacity and what that would look like, one of the newer items in our budget is that we've actually received additional funding for our nurse family partnership, so we're looking at ways that we can expand that. So we have a certain caseload that all of our nurses can take, and once we're able to be at that full capacity, then can do some more outreach and get more people into our programs.
Is that helpful to you, Supervisor Crown? It might be something that you need to look into further if you're truly interested.
I am, because it looks like there's a lot of, when we talk about mitigation, you know, there's mitigation for children that have that support up front and the connection with family, that they don't end up being in alternate care. They don't end up in our jails. They're less likely to have ACEs. They're less likely to have all of the things that I think all the departments were wanting to stress, and we're wanting to move upstream and really have prevention. So when I saw that the nurses aren't able to take full caseloads because of funding, to me, it thinks in future budgets to look at, we need to move some of the things where we're putting fires out, whether it's, you know, trying to work with families that have drug addiction later on. We're going upstream and really working on supporting families early and having prevention. So thank you.
And thank you for those comments. And I see no one else wishing to address something within that budget. And so we'll move on to the Highway Department. Pages 179 through 183. And Supervisor Pagonis, do you have anything here that you would like to speak to?
I would like to point out the dramatic increase in special bridge levy. So those are levy dollars, but they're allowable levy dollars. And I also want to remind this body that all of the levy that's used by this department is for winter and summer maintenance. And so by the end of April this year, the winter had been so bad that a pretty good portion of the maintenance dollars had been utilized. And I think Supervisor Henning can help me, but I understand the price of salt has gone up dramatically, and I was told that the price of salt is higher than the price of asphalt, which is pretty dramatic.
Supervisor Henning?
Yep.
Oh, that is true. The salt prices went sky high, and everybody's using a lot more of it. We're using brine also, that's helping to mitigate it, but the additives on ice and snow depend on the temperature of your roads, so there isn't any just straight line. It varies on the product you're going to use, and you've got to pay for whatever it is. And asphalt's up too, so.
Thank you for that information. I don't see anyone else wishing to speak to that budget, so we'll move on to the Human Resource Department budget. Chair of this is Supervisor Mark Beckfield. And does anyone, I think there maybe needs to be a little conversation here. Supervisor Pagonis?
I don't have much. I know that out of the 5 professionals in the department, 3 have left, so we're down 3 individuals. There was actually a motion in finance to delay the hiring of one to use the spare funds for the sheriff's department. Now it seems like a moot point, given we've now got, and we don't have anyone in the position, so I think that we could probably recover from that.
Supervisor DeLuca, did you have a question here, please?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I read something 2 different places about the Human Resources Director. Are we holding that position or eliminating that position?
Bring that back to our county administrator.
The position itself still exists, and actually we are currently recruiting for that position. We have a short-term plan and a long-term plan for the evolution of that department, and we'll continue to work on that within the funding that is allowed by the board.
Madam Chair, I have one more.
Supervisor Pagonis, please.
Yeah, I just have one small comment. Something that's innovative in human resources this year, I don't know, given the lack of staff, whether it's going to go forward, but for the first time that I'm aware of, they've actually started a diversity program. It's a small amount of funds, $2,200, but it's to begin recruiting and considering more diverse staffing. So I was actually pleased to hear that.
Thank you. The next budget, I have no one else wishing to speak. The next budget that I have is Information Systems. Oh, I'm sorry. We'll make it yet. 191, Human Services. Human Services budget. And Supervisor Pagonis, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, I have a few comments, and I think it's a little less confusing, I think, if we do look at the breakdown. I'm on page 196. Overall, the levy for the department is pretty static. It's up by about just $55,000, so it's pretty static. But notably, program number 1 on page 196 is Child Protection Services, and you'll note there the levy's down by $500,000, over $500,000. One of the reasons, as I understand it, is because the revenue from the state has increased by $400,000. So I believe that that's the point behind it. There is some concern regarding contracted services when we talk about the overages in the department. It's in this area that I believe we're seeing the majority of it. In Program 2, which is where CCS is, there is no tax levy associated with CCS. It's subprogram number 6. However, the levy overall for program number 2 is up by the $500,000, I think, that came out of program 1. The majority of it is going into the outpatient clinic. So that's a shift, certainly which the department can do, is make shifts within the department regarding how they plan to use their levy. Similarly, the other departments have, I shouldn't call it departments, the other programs have some shifting in dollars. We are hopeful to see some increases in the children's long-term care and the Birth to 3 program, we're hopeful to see an increase over 2019. Otherwise, the only other thing that I think is important to note that, I'm sorry, I'm skipping around for you. I'm back on page 194. There's a line item that I think is a little bit confusing at the top under revenue where it says fund balance applied. I believe the finance director and I have a disagreement on this. The amount that you see there is not a fund balance that's being held. It's the dollars that we expect to get in the December of the following year. So for 2019, we will receive $1,300,000 for 2018 expenditures, and then in 2020 December we'll get the $1,800,000, and then the 2021 we'll get the $2,300,000. So it's listed here as a fund balance. If you recall, Brock Guyan, when he was here, he said it's essentially a receivable. We're getting it, but it's eventually. So that's the, those are all expenses paid out for services by CCS that are not fully reimbursable at the time of the expenditure, and because they're over the Medicaid rate. So we get them at a later date. I think that's all I have.
Supervisor Wilkie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to take a few moments and direct your attention to page 194, overview of revenues and expenditures, particularly under expenditures, contracted services. I want you to go down to that line item. Now, the first couple numbers I'm going to quote you are not there because I had to go back into last year's budget book. And what I want to tell you is, in my estimation, this is what I've referred to in the past is fantasy line items. The finance director has taught me that a nicer term might be underfunding, okay? We'll call it underfunding, fantasy line item. Now, I'd be interested in, as I walk through this, after I'm done, if somebody on Human Services can convince me that this is the year that it's not a fantasy line item. Back in 2017, you don't have this in your book, they came in under that at $15.2 million. And then in 2018, they did a fantasy line item, in my opinion, and budgeted 12.7. Well, then in 2018, that is in your book there, they actually come in at 17.9 million. Now, in 2019, again, a fantasy line item. They budgeted 12.
Excuse me, but would you please use an overage or use the appropriate term rather than calling this a fantasy item?
Well, I guess it's a person's judgment what appropriate term is. In my opinion, it's a fantasy line item. 12.3 under budgeting. Not an accurate number, not truth in budgeting. They're estimating that they're going to come in at 17 million. Now that pretty much tells me again it was a fantasy line item. Now we're back dropping it down again. We're going to budget and pretend we're going to come in at 14.8 million. Now 3 times in a row we've been told believe. Believe. And now we're being told again, believe. Somebody explained to, and I should, before I say that, I understand this concept with the deepest respect for judges, and he was the one that taught me this about what I call a fantasy line item. because they did it one time in their budget. And when I pushed them on it and said, well, you know you're not going to come in at that number. It's just unreal. Well, yeah, but then I'd have had to cut something else. Is that what this is about? That we know in our hearts of hearts, the numbers say that we're going to blow over that number. Somebody tell me now, the third time around, why I shouldn't call it a fantasy line item.
I'm going to ask the Director of Human Services to talk about perhaps some of the trends that delivering services differently maybe be an explanation for this. Diane Cable, Director of Human Services. Why don't you come right to the front here?
Good evening, everyone. So I'll give some response. I don't know that I'll fully and hopefully be able to give comment to the question with regard to the trends that we are seeing. There is significant issues that are occurring within our community, and our responsibility for responding to that is through a variety of different mandated services. Our largest overages, as I've presented before to the Human Services Board, to the Finance and Budget Committee, and to this board, you have heard this, is in the area of alternate care and in hospitalizations. Alternate care, both adults and children. We are working very hard as an agency and looking at things to be able to intervene and respond earlier so that we are not responding at the moment of crisis and having to have as many high-cost placements. We're beginning to see some shifts. I did forward to this board earlier today some graphs. I didn't realize you couldn't open the Word documents. I re-forwarded it to you in the PDF to be able to show that some of those trends, we're seeing the effect of some of the changes that are occurring. We're seeing some reductions in alternate care and those other high-cost areas. I appreciate that it's hard to hear that this takes time. And we are talking about people who are walking through the doors. We are working, we work collaboratively with the jail, with the schools, with community partners to be able to be responsive and to help intervene as early as we can. And we are working on different mitigations internally from a variety of different levels to be able to not only be responsive to what we are responsible for and our community, but also be responsive to mitigating those higher costs that are occurring.
Thank you.
That didn't answer my question. I guess I'll try to be more
sorry.
specific. Why should one believe that this third time around, this is a realistic number?
So with regard to our budget that we submit.
Yeah, that's what I'm pointing out. Under contractual services, I have no doubts, and I truly support the direction Human Services going, from an institutional, putting people in institutions, the cost of it, the restrictiveness, to family-based, supporting families, strengthening families. It makes good fiscal sense, but more important, I think it's a better form of intervention. So the move in the direction you're going, I have never quibbled with. I strongly support. What I'm specifically looking at, and I'm saying, is that for the third time around, I believe we have an unrealistic number. Why this time should we believe that it's
So
Okay, we're coming in, one final
Oh,
thing.
sorry.
We're coming in, your estimate, okay, which I think might be an underestimate, but your estimate has 17 million on that. But now you're going to drop it down to 14.8, like you've done previously. Why this year is it going to work?
So some of the changes from prior years is that our outpatient clinic is up and running. Our CCS program is, we're in a different place. Prior years, it was building and developing that program and beginning to build the capacity to be able to provide the services at the level of need. And we have begun to provide more and more services internally. So we are shifting what's used to be contract services into providing more of those services within the agency through our staff.
Okay, I hope you will keep us abreast on a monthly basis on if you're staying on budget this year and we don't let it creep away like we have in previous years. I don't want third time around be the charm.
Supervisor Stelges, did you have something to add here?
Yes, Madam Chair. A lot of it, I guess, was Supervisor Wilkie just asked for the clarification, but I think to his point, the issue is not the services that we're providing, but to make sure we have an accurate budget number, because if it's not accurate, we ought to be taking some other actions and make the hard decisions now rather than complaining about our evaporating fund balance later. So I'd rather know the hard truth now. Are we seeing anything in 2019, in the latter months here of 2019, that would actually statistically show that we're on a downward trajectory in this? And Supervisor Dunning is pointing something to me, but I haven't seen that, or maybe I haven't looked correctly. But
yeah. So as I commented earlier, we're seeing a decrease in alternate care.
Okay. So we do see a downward trend.
Yes.
So you could justify and say that the budget is statistically based on some projection?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Could I ask a question about one of the charts?
Supervisor Pagonis?
I have a question about one of the charts that was provided to us. The chart is titled Median Length of Stay, and it shows data for 2018 and 2019. And
do you want to give the page number?
It's in what Ms. Cable sent to us via email. And so it's median length of stay, and what it states, and are these actual numbers? It shows reunification 11, children who've aged out 60.
These are percentages.
These are percentages.
Or these are numbers, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry?
These are numbers, yes.
Their actual numbers of individuals who've aged out is 62.6. It has to be a percentage. I guess you could have a 0.6 child, but truly?
No, this is medium length of stay is the length of time, I'm sorry. It's months.
So this represents months.
Yes.
And so a child is aged out after 62 months, that's 5 years?
That is a median length of stay based off of the state reporting system, yes.
So it's 5 years.
When you're looking at not just for one child.
Right. But we're talking about the children who have aged out.
Yes.
I find that to be a very alarming
I would agree.
number.
I would agree, which is being worked on.
Thank you.
Supervisor Chilson?
Thank you. I'm going to take off from Supervisor Wilkie's comments. My struggle with the numbers on the budget are this. I don't disagree with Supervisor Wilkie in his analysis. I think history provides a lot of data that is very useful in the present. What I'm having trouble with is back in April, when we had our joint meeting, Human Services, HR, or no, admin and finance and budget. The consultant told us that we've experienced significant pain, and that, in her words, that I could expect 2 more years of significant pain, followed by 1 more year that's very painful, but not as significant as the first 2. So if that analysis from the consultant who put this program together is accurate, and they're the ones that are guiding the direction of the department, I'm using the information that was presented. If I interpret it wrong, you'll have to clarify it. But if that information's correct, that I can expect significant pain, I'm wondering how the numbers presented where we're showing a decrease accurately represents the statements that were made about what we can expect in terms of financial numbers coming forward in the next 2 to 3 years. Those statements based against what the budget is, or what the numbers that are presented are.
So I want to make sure I understand. Could you restate that once more, what you're asking? You're asking for a projection for the next 2 to 3 years? Is that?
In terms of Supervisor Wilkie's comments, where the budget numbers have been reduced versus the actual. This year's actual versus next year's projected. If we're going to experience significant pain, how do those numbers represent the consultant's analysis of the situation to correspond to a reduction in the budget book?
So I would speak to that. The consultant is there working with us on reforming and changing our system as relates to the child welfare system. And we're talking about our whole budget as a human services department. So she's speaking from the change in that it takes time to be able to respond, to have that shift of system change with regard to, and she was focused on in the child welfare system. In terms of looking at the whole department, we feel that even though the consultant may have implied that it's going to continue to get worse before it gets better, we are seeing change, positive change, occurring not only in the area of child welfare, but also as a result of our work within behavioral health that is affecting across the entire agency. So we're seeing an increase within our revenues coming in, and by building our internal services, it's helping to support and offset costs in other areas, and to be able to provide those earlier interventions, which is why we feel that we can present the budget that we've presented.
Supervisor Wilkie, do you have your...
In the written materials that we were provided at that joint meeting between the admin, budget and finance and the Human Services Board, following up on what Supervisor Chilson said, it was written right in there, plus it was said to us orally, expect to go 950,000 over in your budget in 2020 and likely the same in 2021. Of course, always when I hear 950, just shy of a million, it's kind of like telling you at 999, but chances are it would be higher. Are we or are we not having a real budget here, or is there plans that we're going to go 950,000 over like was said?
We didn't present a budget to go over the budget. We're presenting a budget in which, again, as I just commented about to Supervisor Chilson's question, in which we're addressing all the different needs through all of our available ways to be able to respond to our needs and work within the budget that is here.
Okay, if I can rephrase or interpret that, because in budget and finance, we made no cuts, we made no numbers. I think your numbers were lined up wrong. In fact, I even had an amendment I was going to do, and I thought, nah, I shouldn't be doing that. I shouldn't need to do that. So your message to us is, we're not going to have a repeat of 2018 and 2019 and 2020 going 950,000 over budget or more?
That's not our intention. And again, I cannot stand here and make any promises. I don't know if there are any significant issues that will occur, but we would certainly apprise our board, and it would come before any other committee that we need to be bringing that forward to.
Okay, thank you for answering my questions.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm not seeing any other questions in regard to the Human Services budget, so we'll move on to the Information System budget. Dave Hayden is the director there. Any questions in regard to Information System? I'm seeing none. There's a small insert in the budget in regard to the library. Supervisor Pagonis, do you want to speak to that just briefly?
Sure. Let me find the right page here. There is a change. The amount was calculated slightly incorrectly, and if I remembered what I did with it, I think I have an amendment to the budget. Hang on, that's debt service levy. I had an amendment somewhere on.
And we can address the amendments when we're through with all of the budget, come back to it?
It's just to change the library allocation, and it, hang on, I've got it. So the allocation for the library is reduced by, do I have this right, Norb? It's reduced by 1,200?
Yeah.
Is that correct?
1,198, yes.
Okay, I was just eyeballing it. So the line at the bottom right that says 805,401 should read 804,203. So does that, this is an amendment, does that need a motion?
You would have to make that in the form of a motion.
Okay, I move modifying the library allocation from 805,401 to 804,203.
Is there a second to that motion? Supervisor Leary? Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, please indicate by saying aye. Opposed, same sign, and the motion carries. Anything further?
I'm just wondering, Madam Chair, if everyone understands why we do these library allocations.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
I said I'm just wondering whether the members of the board understand what we just, why we have a library allocation at all. I mean,
and
we're on page
217, and basically the library allocation, would you like to explain our arrangement with other small libraries?
Well, it's actually straight out of the statutes, and Attorney Sullivan can help me. Attorney Sullivan and I were both on a committee several years ago to modify how we handle allocating costs among the different libraries. And so what it is when individuals from a municipality that does not have a library uses, let's say, L.A. Phillips Library or Altoona Library, then the municipality is allocated an amount for that usage. So those of us who live within a city that has a library, we pay it as part of our city property taxes. For those individuals who live in a municipality that doesn't have a library, there's a separate allocation. Back in the day, it used to actually say library fees, and that caused a lot of heat within the municipality, so now it's just rolled into their county property tax. So that's why it's even here. We've never included it before, but Norb is being very thorough, so here it is.
Supervisor DeLuca.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know that later on in our packet, on page 10, they talk about that, and I did have a question. Fairchild and the village, the township of Fairchild and the village of Fairchild are excluded from the service, but not included in the intermunicipal library services. I was wondering, is that an error, or they are not connected in that
Would you like to answer that, Supervisor Pagonis?
Yes, I'm happy to. If the town of Fairchild does have a library, but they exempt themselves so that it really, the downside is it applies a lot of pressure to the Augusta Library, but they've exempted themselves so they don't have to make the payments. So, but they do have a library such as it is, and that's why they're permitted to exempt themselves. I wasn't sure who asked the question.
Those exemptions come back to the board for approval, as you recall.
And
They
I vote
come and
against
then
it.
they're approved by the board.
Right. That, is that
the next-
Supervisor DeLuca, did I answer your question?
I want to know, are they involved in the inter-municipal?
Group?
The
No,
Fairchild?
they have an
Because they're
independent.
not listed.
They have a standalone library. And the reality is that individuals in the town of Fairchild use the Augusta Library, but the residents of the town of Fairchild don't have to pay the Augusta Library for their usage, because we exempt them.
Okay.
Thank you. If there are no further questions on that budget, we'll move forward to the medical examiner's budget. The medical examiner's budget is on 219, 218, and 219. And this is an arrangement, I think, do we still share? We contract?
We contract for the service with Dunn County, and we pay based on our actual costs.
And so this is really based on exactly what it costs us. I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm going to move on to Parks and Forests. This is page 220 through 225. Supervisor Stelgis, did I see a hand go up? Okay.
Yeah, just a couple comments. Once again, this is modestly negative in levy, but there's two noteworthy things I'd like to point out. One is our staff is decreasing slightly in that we no longer are keeping a full-time employee at the Expo Center, and are going to try to cover that need with a couple part-timers. That will be done in 2020 as an experiment to see how well that will work and whether we can provide adequate services. That's an effort to try to make the Expo Center sort of a break-even entity on its own. Secondly, the timber sale revenue. We did review at our last meeting a little bit more sophisticated projection model trying to forecast timber revenues. The major conclusion from that was most of our revenues that we will experience in 2020 have already been contracted for through sales in previous years. We did move the revenue forecast from a relatively low-risk model to what I would consider to be a moderate to high-risk model in projections. And so it can vary depending upon weather conditions, collection rates, and so on. So I think we're reasonably in balance, but just a heads up that revenue can fluctuate, probably 10% or so.
Thank you for those comments. Anyone else wishing to address the budget for Parks and Forests?
I just want to provide one number. I just want to provide the number. So Parks and Forest Oversight Committee projected timber sales at 900, I'm going to say 960,000. It was 959,000. and the county administrator increased it by, I believe, $100,000. So the amount that's in your budget book for timber sales, which I guess it's broken out.
It's buried in the
it's-
1523 number.
Right. It's now $1,060,000.
Thank you. Any other comments? Seeing none, we'll move on to our next budget. And that budget is planning and developing on page 227 through 241. Are there any questions in regard to the planning and developing budget? Do you want to make any comments, Supervisor Pagonis?
Yeah, I just want to point out one thing. There was a mistake in the 2019 budget, so tax levy appears to be $882,000, and it should have been $982,000. So while it looks like the 2020 request is an increase of $100,000, it was really a result of a mistake, and possibly Supervisor Gibson can explain it better than I can. But there was $100,000 moved from the fund balance for 2019 to be able to balance the budget. But I don't know what the cause of the mistake was. Oh, okay, then never mind.
Supervisor Gibson, can you shed any light on that? As supervised.
For what it was.
Is Rod Eslinger? Perhaps he can fill in the blank here.
Good evening. Rod Eslinger, Director of Planning and Development. So that $100,000, that was a carry forward request from the two previous budget cycles. That money was allocated for the zoning code update. So if you think back to MSA consultants coming to the board and giving you updates, that money was allocated in those two budget years. That money was carried forward, specifically allocated for the 2019 year. What happened is that we applied that fund balance, and the money didn't get expended properly in the expenditures. So that offset the budget, and so yes, so the budget amount tax levy should have been $982,605, and if you would have balanced, if you looked at those numbers, and we also had another reduction of $6,700. Essentially, when you look at that, it is a 0% increase in the levy dollars for planning and development this year. And I'd also add that we did have an impacted position. We are reducing the staff, real property specialist, on July 1st of 2020. Does that help?
Thank you for that information. Appreciate it. I don't see any other questions in regard to the planning and developing budget, so we will move on to the Register and Probate and Clerk of Juvenile Courts, and that's on 242 through 246. Are there any questions or comments in regard to that budget? Supervisor Pagonis, do you have anything to add here?
No, it's
Thank you.
pretty self-explanatory.
So then we will move on then to the Register of Deeds budget on 247 through 250. Supervisor Pagonis, please.
Thank you. I just want to point out for Register of Deeds that they are a revenue-generating department, so they bring in more than they spend. Their proposal is going down, and I don't recall exactly why. Well, yes, I do. I take that back. One of the bulk of the revenue is from the filing of land records and documents in the searches, and I believe there's an expectation that the housing market is going to slow down, and that's what we're going to see the repercussion. The public charges are also going down slightly, and that is charges for vital records. So there's I guess people to get a special type of driver's license need to show every name change they have. So they go into the Register of Deeds and they have to get their birth certificates, their marriage certificates, their divorce certificates, et cetera. And that's all things that is revenue generating for the Register of Deeds.
I'm not seeing any other questions or comments. And so we will move on to the next budget, which is the Sheriff's Department budget on 251 through 260. And is anyone wishing to address any issue within this budget? I'm not seeing. I think we will wait with any amendment until the budget is finished. Thank you. All right, let's move onward then to the Treasurer's budget, page 261 to 265. And I'm not seeing any comments in regard to that budget. Nor questions.
Madam Chair.
So, excuse me, Supervisor Pagonis?
Thank you. There is a significant decrease in, this is also a revenue generating department, there's a significant decrease, and the explanation on page 261 was not adequately updated. Madam Treasurer gave us a change in her description and is expecting a substantial decrease in investment income. And she attributes that to two elements. One is that there's a reduction in the interest rate, but the second is that there is less cash for her to invest. And the reduction in cash is the domino effect of the payouts to essentially front the Department of Human Services until at least the CCS money comes in, because according to the accountant in DHS, it's between 6 to 8 months. So when there was all that rapid hiring, the county had to cover wages and benefits before we were getting reimbursement from the state. And so that's when the cash coffers went down. So the treasurer had less to invest. And my guess is there's not going to be a lump sum to catch up. So that is what attributes the decrease from 2019 to 2020 in terms of, again, a negative tax levy because it's revenue generating.
Thank you for that explanation. I'm not seeing anyone with further questions in regard to that budget, so we will move on to the next one, which is the Veterans budget. Any questions in regard to the Vets budget? Seeing none, we will go on to risk management. A new approach here. And do you want to give an explanation?
On risk, no, I don't.
Okay. Any questions? Would you like to explain the difference here in what's happened with having Frank in this position?
Which question are we speaking to?
And
the risk management.
This is now under.
Yes.
Right.
So the risk management function has been incorporated into administration, and the positions have been changed so that we have a full-time risk analyst, safety individual who essentially manages the program. Frank Draxler oversees that program, and the clerical support in administration provides much of the needed clerical support for risk management. So we've been able to downsize that function somewhat and centralize it at the same time, which has resulted in savings not only in the program but also in the expenditures to have the program operate.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, that completes the operational budget description for the county. And at this time, I would take any amendments that people may have in regard to the operational budget. Supervisor Coffey.
Thank you. In this very fiscally critical time, I move to reduce the number of additional correctional officers recommended by the Finance and Budget Committee. If you look on page 22 of your booklet, I think that will help you to see where I'm getting the numbers that I'm using. About 3/4 of the way down, it says Finance and Budget Committee recommendations, Sheriff, adding 4 correctional officers at a total of $333,696. So I recommend that we reduce from 4 to 2 correctional officers, and the reduction in the number of officers will correspondingly reduce the increase in the department overtime. So right now, the overtime...
Is that your motion?
Correct.
Before we go on to an explanation?
Okay.
You're making that motion, am I correct?
Correct.
Is there a second to that motion, and a second by Supervisor Dunning? Now an explanation.
Okay, I want to add to the proposal, though I made a mistake here, because we want those levy funds that will be made available put into the contingency fund. So that part of the motion.
Thank you. And Supervisor Dunning? Thank you.
Okay, so the rationale for the motion, it's very important to me that all of our staff are safe. And looking at the numbers, in the past year, the Sheriff's Department has had a decrease in the number of jail inmates. And as I looked at the secure jail population statistics in 2019 and 2018, my very rough math as I look at it for the fiscal years January to October of 2019 for secure responsible ADP, and this is a count of the average number of inmates that are on the secure jail roster in a 24-hour period, and they are inmates that Eau Claire County must physically house, was about 200 average number of inmates per day right now in 2019. In 2018, that rough average was about 222 inmates, average number of inmates that are on secure jail roster in a 24-hour period, and they're inmates that Eau Claire County must house. We also have 3 employees on leave, but by the middle of November, all of the employees will be off leave and the Sheriff's Department shall be fully staffed. I gave you a sheet of paper, which I was able to get from Norb, our finance director, about 2019 correctional officers' leaves. Now, being a supervisor myself at one point, we often had people who were out. Maybe it was maternity leave. Maybe it was something else that happened. In 2019, there were a lot of leaves in the correctional office through nobody's fault, just one of those things that happened. And military leave, one person was out 273 days. That's almost a whole entire year. Another person, 183 days. So they had a lot of leave even though they were fully staffed. I think that when those 3 people come back, it's going to be like Christmas. You know, when I had employees, getting all those people back to work when they'd been out for a while was quite a nice thing. And I think that will also affect the amount of overtime that's going to have to be paid in the upcoming year. Also, we have not had staff turnover, which says a lot about the managers who work with our correctional group, because people have stuck with it, and this is not a very easy job, I'm sure. So I don't see any service changes that are going to be due, but one thing that was brought out from Mr. Kramer was that if there were 4 additional officers, and I'm looking back at page 22 now, that the overtime would then be decreased to a full-time equivalent, which is $83,424. And if you look at my budget change for overtime increase, because there will be only 2 people, it was stated by Ron Kramer that his estimate would then be a reduction of $20,000 in overtime, which means that instead of this deficit being $83,424, it would be $63,424. This money will then go into the contingency fund, which gives us some money that is levy dollars, which at this point right now is all funded by fund balance, which would give us a bit more flexibility.
Thank you for that explanation. Open for discussion. Supervisor Miller.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. A number of items that Supervisor Coffey just raised, and I can appreciate her concern about it, and we talked just briefly a little bit today. First of all, when they say fully staffed, actually simply means the positions that have been allocated to that area are filled. It's not fully staffed as a department or the jail. And for those of you who have been here prior to the jail opening back in 2012, you may recall that the National Institute of Corrections that came in and assisted us with the development, design of the jail, the staffing patterns, the training, the transition, all of that, had recommended, actually at that time, 5 more correctional positions than what this board at that time agreed to fund. It was sort of a, can we, will we open, oh, won't we open? And I'll let Supervisor Wilkie speak to that at some point if he so desires. But the idea that we're fully staffed, we're really, even at what we have, it's minimal staffing for the number and the client and clients or inmates that we have there. The issue of jail population, as of today, it has started to go up, or as of the past couple of days, it's starting to increase again. Now, we haven't seen any being housed outside of the county yet this month. What they're doing is they're putting more in the Huber section, and they're putting more in the short-term, I forgot the terminology for it, short-term cells, the booking area, just to avoid having them shipped out and to avoid the extra cost that isn't budgeted for. Now that they've done that before, and then all of a sudden it explodes and the numbers go up and they have no choice but to ship out. The concern I have is right now, okay, all the positions are filled. That means they can only allow 3 people to take any time off at a given time. 3 at a time is the maximum. So what happens if someone happens to call in sick or someone has an injury, like Supervisor Coffey provided the sheet. We had 3 in the beginning of the year out with injuries. So what happens if we have that? They have to call in, forced overtime, then there we go, the overtime goes up. They have no choice because it is minimally staffed at this time. And keep in mind that this population that we have today is nothing like we had back in 2012 and prior to that, prior to opening the new jail. We have a much more labor-intensive group in the secure population, which has averaged an increase anywhere from 50 to 80, 90 inmates in any given time. But we're looking at, because we've had so many alternatives to incarceration, we have higher risk individuals in that jail. It has become, like I said, more labor intensive because of the drug-related issues, because of the mental health issues, antisocial behaviors, whatever you want to call it. It is definitely a greater risk for our staff than it has ever been. I would encourage any of you to go and take what I would refer to as a ride-along, to go up into the jail and sit there for a couple of hours and work with the staff or watch what the staff have to contend with, maybe especially on a Friday night. However, I would strongly encourage all of you to defeat this amendment. We have had, like I said, we basically, when the jail opened, we reduced the request at that time by at least 5 people with an implicit promise that as the population increased in that jail, we would start adding staff. And we have never done that in the past 7 years. Yes, our turnover right now, thank God, is in great shape. But that hasn't always been the case either, because of the tension and all of the hassles that the individuals have had to go through. The staff are just amazing that they have put up what they have put up with, but I don't know how long they can do that once that population increases again. So please, please give some serious thought to this. It's about time we take care of the staff and do the right thing.
Thank you for those comments. Supervisor Wilkie?
Yeah, Supervisor Miller, I was the one that sat down with, I got to admit, the sheriff and the jail captain and negotiated an agreement because we're at polar opposites. We had those that wanted to do best practice, what the sheriff was, understandably advocating for, and those that were at the far end that we couldn't even open the jail. The sheriff would be derelict of his duties and would have to call it a safety concern and say no. So we're in bed. So I negotiated an agreement, and I will now admit I was stingy, real stingy. I didn't realize it at the time. Well, oh, God, I didn't want to. I
got your back.
Oh, God, I did not know. I didn't realize the sheriff was here. I don't want to have to admit that now after all these years. But yes, okay, I was stingy. But I do greatly appreciate at that time the good faith effort that was done by the department to deal with this. I've shared with some of you, I did do what kind of calling a ride along. I spent a Friday for 5 hours sitting up in the jail and observing what's going on. After that observation, I changed my tune. And I came to a realization at that time. Now, we've made it this far along, but let's keep in mind when we figured out staffing levels, this department was dealing with drunks, okay? Drunks are a whole lot better to deal with than a meth addict. Now, you can get some pretty ugly drunks, but you can get some that are pretty happy and they'll sleep it off, and in the morning they're apologetic and they're very easy to work with. Not the case for somebody that's addicted to meth. So the clientele, the inmates up there has clearly changed, so which affects the staffing levels. So let's keep in mind that they're not doing best practice up there in terms of their staffing level or good practice or fair practice. They're at bare minimum. If we cut any of the, cut back even more there, the sheriff would have to do his due diligence and say, nah, this is a safety issue. Be shipping more out. Now, you're being told that the occupancy is going down. That kind of goes up and down. We've seen that, and tomorrow it could skyrocket on us. And the occupancy, as of today, is over what we should be doing as far as occupancy. It's at an 83% occupancy. And if it's at an 83% occupancy, you can't do adequate classification of individuals. And keep in mind, as Supervisor Miller said, they're also using cells that are intended for ongoing folks there. They're using the intake cells up there. When these folks come back from leave, knock on wood that all works out, it ain't going to be Christmas by any means. It might be semi-normal for some of those folks working up there. They are still being mandatory call-in. Have one weekend off, one weekend every 3 weekends, and then be called in on your weekend, ordered in. You have to come. And then have it happen again, and then have it happen again. You can kiss your summer goodbye and your family life. That is a big contributing factor of why we've had a perpetual turnover up there. They just can't have a life. Now, we've done better. We've done a lot of effort, as the department has, in recruiting. They have rolling recruiting now. It's not when you get an opening, we fill it. I mean, they are constantly on a roll to recruit to make sure that they don't fall behind. There was a point, at one point, they had 5 vacancies up there, and the effects that it had. When we staff so minimally and we have these constant call-ins, you're burning out those folks. So you're perpetuating the problem. And every time we've got to hire a new person, you've just burnt another $50,000. That's what it costs you to train those people and get them up to snuff. It takes 3 to 4 months before they're able to do the actual shift themselves up there. They've asked year after year after year. Right now, they're not having to, at this moment in time, house inmates out of county. Don't be surprised if tomorrow or next week that it's back again. It will come back. We'll do the best we can. And also keep in mind, they're also putting secure inmates. They try to judge which is less secure and safer to put in the Huber section, okay? Because we don't have that many Huber up there like we did years back. But we haven't increased the staffing coverage over there for them in any way. Same staffing, more difficult inmates being placed there. And like has been said, we're using the booking area to cells to house inmates, again, to try to prevent from having to house out. I strongly encourage you that we can't continue to be, as I was back some years ago, stingy anymore. It's a human issue. It's a safety issue for not only the inmates, but for our correctional officers. That's one tough job. I wouldn't do it. I couldn't do it in my prime. And it's a liability concern up there. That is a high risk, high liability concern. So I suggest by, minimally increasing our staffing levels, with 4 officers. And keep in mind, too, the way this was set up by Budget and Finance is by hiring 4 correctional officers, they're reducing their overtime budget by $83,429. So it has a bigger impact. They're essentially, what they're doing is they're paying for the 4th officer by deleting their overtime down, okay? With this amendment, you're only deleting the overtime down by doing 2 officers by $20,000. So you're getting a lot more for your money if you go with 4 officers, because they can do a staffing pattern in such a fashion then that will actually, they can reduce significant overtime. I would encourage your support of this.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Supervisor Pagonis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Back when we were actually debating building the jail, I recall that Supervisor Wilkie had a revelation that he didn't mention today, and that is, regardless of how many people are actually incarcerated, we still have a minimum number of people who have to be employed there. So changing the jail population by 10 or 12 doesn't change the number of people who are employed. So we need this number of people. Judiciary and Law gets monthly updates on the number of staffing, not only the number of people in the jail, but how the staffing is going. And Lieutenant Riewenstahl has stated that he has a turnover rate of 12%, and that's a significant decrease because of how they've handled overtime. Overtime is now handled in 4-hour blocks. And so instead of having to work 2 8s, a correctional officer would work 1 8 and then a 4. So that change to having 12-hour working blocks for overtime has helped maintain a stable staff. But it's still not right. I mean, we're still exhausting these individuals. We need 5 employees for every 1 post that's being staffed because it's a 24/7 operation. So we just need a lot of people. It's actually 5.24, and that's without overtime. Back in 2012, they asked for 64 correctional officers. They got 57. Now they have 58 actually working up in the jail, and they have 1 individual down at the front desk. So, you know, I guess I view this as finally we identify that there's a need. Supervisor Wilkie is correct. The whole booking area has become very tumultuous because individuals who are using methamphetamines, the downtime is about a week. And so that is just really problematic. Back in the day, and Captain Brasina will talk about this, or can talk about this, someone comes in drunk, they sleep it off, and the next morning you can actually carry on a conversation. That is not true. Individuals on methamphetamines are very belligerent, they're very antagonistic, and they really have no respect for authority. So the job is much more difficult. There has been a lot of turnover in the year, Lieutenant Riewenstahl gave us a statistic, which I'm not really remembering, but it was something like he has someone resign every 53 days. So which is why we have the rolling hiring. So, you know, we could say today we're fully staffed, but right now, while we're all sitting in this room, some correctional officer could be getting trashed and it becomes a problem, and suddenly we're not fully staffed because we have someone on medical leave or we have someone else who's deployed. It's a very fully staffed, even using the term, is very tenuous, and there have been multiple meetings where Lieutenant Riewenstahl would come in and say, we're fully staffed, and then the very next meeting saying, I got 3 resignations. So fully staffed is not what we normally expect to see. So it's important to know that for the $250,000 that we were able to come up with, there's going to be 4 correctional officers because it would realize a reduction in the overtime. So we're getting 4 for the price of 3. By reducing it by 2 does not make economic sense, because we would still be, we'd have to bump up the, and this is by Supervisor Coffey's own numbers, we'd have to add the 166, it's almost 167, plus the 63. That takes us to 220, and for 250, we actually get the third officer, and by doing that, we are able to get the fourth officer by a decrease in overtime. So I suggest we deny the amendment proposed by Supervisor Coffey. I will state that I found it odd that she was presenting it, because she's not on Judiciary and Law, she's not on Finance, she's on P&D. I'm not sure what, and you know, the statement that, well, we have dire financial issues, but replenishing our
This is off topic.
Well, I just want to say, replenishing our contingency by $100,000 does not make sense, given the benefit that we could ultimately have by having these correctional officers.
Supervisor Jansen, are you still wishing to speak?
Sure. Most of my statements have already been summarized by Supervisor Miller, Supervisor Wilkie, and Supervisor Pagonis, but I do have the unique experience that in my daytime job, I do get the opportunity to go in and to teach financial education in the jail, and so I've been doing that for about 3 years now, and I just agree with everything that they have said, that the population, even within that short time of the 3 years that I've been there, has changed. I have the privilege of getting to know some of the correctional officers that work in there, and they are fantastic. We should be extremely proud of the staff that we have in there, and should be doing what we can to support them. You know, I have the advantage of working an hourly desk job, and so to me, you know, getting some overtime is great. I get time and a half, that's fantastic. But with what these individuals are dealing with every day, it's physically, emotionally, mentally draining. And so I do agree that having them be required to have these overtime shifts, it's a risky situation. It puts not only them in danger, but it actually can put the incarcerated individuals in danger as well. And so I think that this addition to our staffing is very important for the community, and that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Supervisor McKinney.
Thank you. I just wanted some clarification. Supervisor Pagonis said much earlier that Finance and Budget had reallocated some funds from one committee or department and redirected it to support the 4. Can I just get clarification that I heard that right?
Supervisor Pagonis, could you answer that?
And we had an open position in Human Resources, and so the proposal was to delay hiring. But in fact, now we have 3 open positions in Human Resources, and the recruitment is going on for the HR director. So that's where some of the funds were coming from. Other funds were coming from increase in clerk of court receipts.
So yes, the funds were redirected to support the 4 hires?
Well, not anymore, because the
No.
positions are empty.
Okay.
Right. Supervisor Coffey.
Thank you. I still would like to touch on the topic that we have spoke over and over again as a finance committee, that it is a very critical time and we have no money. I understand these jobs are very difficult and that people often leave them. In HR, we lost 3 people in, I think, about 3 months. In Human Services, how difficult do you think it is to walk into a home where there are children, where there's been meth, walk in maybe in the middle of the night because that was your charge as a social worker, grab that child out of that house. They can't even take their blanket with them. and maybe they have a severe disability. So to me, thinking about how difficult people's jobs are, and that's why we need to have more employees, is very hard for me to think through. Many jobs are difficult. When we look at secured, paid, out-of-county time, in 2019, we had only 1 day that there was, 1 month, excuse me, that there was 10.7 paid out for secure out-of-county time. In 2018, there were 6 months in which over 10 were paid for out-of-county time. I see this decreasing more, and yet this is what we decide we want to put more money into. To be honest, it makes me very sad because I want to put money into the front end of problems more than the back end, so long as the staff are still safe. And I am very hurt that anyone can tell me that because I'm not in a certain committee, I can't bring up this kind of proposal and amendment. I don't think that that is correct at all. So right now, there's no staff turnover, and we have a decrease in the number of jailmates, and I hope you will vote for this proposal.
Supervisor Russell, please.
Yes, it looks like a fairly large portion of the funding for 4 positions is the result of transferring the money from that HR director position. I assume the 4 positions would be permanent, ongoing positions. So is the intent here to cut the staffing for HR to continue to fund the 4 positions?
Is there an answer for that? Supervisor.
The way that the budget is currently written, it actually transfers that levy capacity from one budget area to another. And so the assumption would be that, yes, the positions would be ongoing. They wouldn't be ended at the end of the 2020 year. And so if you, in 2020, had wanted to add back additional dollars into the area of human resources, you will need to actually allocate a specific portion of tax levy for that purpose. Does that answer your question?
And the question would be, where would that come from?
That would be a decision by the board.
I'd like to respond to that.
Excuse me, I'm going to take Supervisor Dunning.
I'm supporting this amendment for a couple of reasons. One is that we spent a lot of time earlier this evening trying to freeze positions and justifying whether we should freeze all positions. That was put aside for the time being, and now we're adding wanting to add 2 positions, which is certainly better than 4. And to follow up to Supervisor Russell's comments of what happens next year, the 70,000 and the 30,000 need to be looked at again also. Those have to be part of the equation. If we continue to run at that high level, that won't be a problem. But if we, for some reason, don't make those levels, then we have a shortage of funding as a problem. So I think 2 is better than 0, and yes, 4 would be ideal, but I think at this point in time, when we're looking at serious budget issues, let's go with 2.
Supervisor Beckfield.
Thank you. I sit on HR, as a matter of fact, I'm the chair of HR, and when we had that issue with the jailers, it came down to some creative thinking on hours and everything, because the #1 complaint was overtime, because the quality of life, you know, if you do have a family or you want to do, it was a real challenge. We had a heck of a turnover back there. As a matter of fact, I remember one time we had 8 or 9 openings, and we had overtime was almost a given every day. Thank God we're not in that situation, thanks to some creative scheduling of things. But you know, you talked about all these human services situation, in that same 6 years, we fired 124 people in DHS. So in comparison, if you want to compare, those two departments, we've added people and people. They're not the same, but 4 is not a growth number that you're looking at. I think from a safety standpoint, quality of life, and their issue really we thought was pay way back when, and it really came down to quality of life when we got into the jail and asked what it was. Because how would you like to be told you're going to put in a 12-hour day? Okay, that's what they're asking. Do you put in 8, and then they say, hey, good news, you get another 4. So it's kind of it's a situation, and I can see where they can use them. I see where the benefit to the inmates, because your state of mind as an employee, if you're getting drug out, gets a little short too. So I'm going to support the 4 positions because I think it's overdue. So
thank you. Supervisor Miller.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to come back to the point, first of all, that we understaffed to begin with. And we are trying to make up for it at this point where it was, long overdue. This is a 24/7 operation. It's I think somebody said something about a desk job and overtime is great. Yes, I was in that position at one time myself. And, a couple hours of 1 week out of the month, that was fine. But when we're looking at individuals who required overtime and overtime and overtime, as Supervisor Wilkie pointed out, 2 and 3 weekends in a row, that gets really old, especially if it's an individual who wants to have a life outside of work. And I was going to reference the comparison with social workers, and yes, I understand that field, and it can be very tough. I do understand that. But also we got to remember, I think we just added some 60 social workers to that department within the last year or 2 to help alleviate some of their compression and some of the problems that they were running into. And we're just asking for 4 here. The out-of-county, again, that could change next week. It seems like our population goes up as the winter months creep up and creep around, and that's when we end up having to send individuals out to other counties. And it's unfortunate, well, fortunate for us that the 2 neighboring counties have been open for us to be able to utilize. Otherwise, if we're going to start shipping them further away, we're going to have even a higher cost yet. So again, I would urge this group tonight to defeat this amendment and let's go forward. Thank you.
I do not have, Supervisor Cronk. And I would ask now, because we've been discussing this for quite some time, please don't reiterate things that have already been said. If you have some new information, new kinds of perspective, I would appreciate keeping to that. Kim?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Thank you, Madam Chair. I hope I have some new information or a new perspective. I too used to work at the jail, and it has been quite some time since I have worked up there, so my experience might be a little bit dated. But I do understand the quality of life that overtime can reduce for people that are called in. On the other hand, and I do want to say too, for the correctional officers that I still know up there, I do have an enormous amount of respect for. I don't know everybody, I can't attest to everybody up there, but I have participated in the Citizens Police Academy, which was like a 10 or 11 week series, kind of touring the jail, being up in the jail. I did tour the jail when I was a supervisor, first coming on. So I feel like I'm coming from a place of, I'm not just speaking from no experience. The other pieces to this, though, that are a struggle for me, they're a serious struggle for me, and it's part of the reason why I asked the question earlier, is how much funding would it cost for a nurse, a case manager to have, or a nurse to have a full case management load for the Nurse-Family Partnership, because they get involved early and they're starting to prevent reasons why people are up in our jail. And also reasons why people end up in alternate care and human services. So when I ask that question, when I'm thinking about budgeting and I'm thinking about prevention, to me, yes, I respect the officers that are up there, but I also think, you know, years ago, the county board charged the CJCC to reduce the amount of people who are incarcerated. I'm not going to say inmates. I prefer to say people language first, people who are incarcerated, for that percentage to be under 1% a year. And I think before it was 6 to 7%. Throughout that challenge, we began having all of these creative solutions to jail, the jail population mitigation. And now we're saying, well, okay, now it's kind of the worst of the worst. Well, I think at that time when we had a population increase of 6 or 7%, we were probably saying that at that time as well. So to me, I think, I keep going back to, if we continue to staff it or increase staffing, I feel like we won't continue to mitigate issues of having high amounts of people on probation holds that are there less than 10 days, or we have folks that are in our jail for a very short amount of time. And while that doesn't seem to have anything to do with the correctional officers, because they don't choose who comes to the jail, I feel like we won't continue to work on the mitigation strategies. I don't know if anybody can tell me how many people in our jail currently have mental health or AODA issues. What's the number? And I would say to that too, we signed on to the Stepping Up initiative, I think in 2016, if I'm correct, and we haven't implemented everything that could be done to help people with mental health issues stay out of our jail. And then we wouldn't need extra correctional officers, which is a goal. I think that should be a community and a county goal. So I respect the officers that are up there. I respect their time. I respect their families. I respect the safety. However, I am going to support the amendment to have 2. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Burgonis?
Call the question.
I just wanted to make one correction. So in committee, we actually made the commitment that moving forward regarding an HR director, that we would find the money or use contingency if it was necessary. So we made that commitment. So what Administrator Schauf said was partially correct. Yes, moving forward, we would need to continue to fund that, and we would need to continue to find the dollars for it, as we do for every department, as we do for health insurance, as we do for everything. We always have to look for the money. So yes, we would have to do it, but we made the commitment in finance and budget that we would use contingency dollars if it became critical to hire an HR director. Right now, there's being interviews for an HR director. There was a meet and greet last week. So that is moving forward.
Supervisor Wilkie, you have your light
Call the
on.
question.
You have call the question. Vice call the question. Thank you. And I think we're going to call the question. And so at this time, take your keypad and vote to support cutting down.
Can we get a clarification on what I vote for?
Clarification on the vote.
To repeat the motion.
The motion on the floor is an amendment, and it's to reduce 2 correctional officers. And the monies are stated on her amendment sheet, unless you want me to say it again, but it would be changing the increase of 4, which is in the budget and decreasing it by, the amendment is to decrease it by 2 correctional officers.
So voting no means 4 and yes means 2.
Correct.
Correct. Thank you.
Take your keypads, please, now, and vote.
Broken.
Wake the guy up in the back booth.
Yeah. All right.
Go up to 16.
And the motion failed 12 to 16. So moving on, we have finished the budget for operations, and I see nothing further. Excuse me.
I'm starting to feel like a crush on. We gotta vote on the motion, is it? I don't know, we don't want to discuss that over here.
We have one other,
Colleen, your mic. Your mic.
How about-
Mic is on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I didn't feel like a crush on.
It's getting late.
Sorry, we have a technical issue, okay. We will move on to the capital budget, and the last action item will fall under that budget. So, and do you want to go over the capital budget, Supervisor Pagonis? And that comes on page 276. The capital budget is in detail at the back of the book, starting on 276 and running to, I guess this page isn't numbered.
I just have a couple of points there.
280.
Are there any questions in regard to the capital budget?
276.
Please, Supervisor Pagonis, please.
I just have a couple of points to make. So there's been a lot of discussion all year about a new highway facility. We actually purchased a parcel out on Highway 53, 53. There's a change in plans because of the cost of the facility. So some of the dollars used to actually do the design have been reallocated and are now putting LED lighting in the jail. And so that's one change. There is some dollars set aside to improve and correct the current highway facility, and the parcel will just kind of sit there. The other thing is we're continuing to be hopeful for a 6th courtroom. But we have an asterisk now in the budget book saying that the 6th courtroom build-out will only be contingent on whether or not a judge is approved, a 6th judge is approved. Other than that, I think everything is pretty much typical for our typical capital projects. And I'm just commenting on page 277 and 278. So I don't really have any comments regarding the 5-year plan. But also, I think maybe everyone here is aware that the state did give us 2 additional district attorneys. So now we have 11. And so that build out for those offices are also in this budget. That's all I have.
Thank you. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, actually, the build-out for the DA's office was moved into 2019, so not in this budget.
Thank you.
There's an expansion for storage space.
I'm not seeing any other requests to speak in regard to the capital budget. And so I'm wondering about the last, to increase the debt service levy. Supervisor Pagonis, you had indicated that you wanted to make an amendment.
I do. So when we were preparing this budget, we underestimated the amount for debt service. And so that has to be adjusted. The increase is 215,562. Hang on, is this how, am I doing this right? So, but then there was a reduction. Norba, I don't understand what you wrote to me.
Okay. Do we need conference here?
Because this isn't what I wrote. I wrote something different.
Okay, so what happened is in the original proposed budget, there was an estimate of what the 2019 issue would be. And at that time, we did an issue at an estimated interest rate as well as an estimated borrowing amount, and we assumed it was all going to be 10 years. When we actually did the issue, we separated out, some of it was at a 5-year life, and some of it was at 10, and the interest rate was different. So the net result is a $215,562 increase to the tax levy. But there's actually two components that kind of net to that. So when you see the budget resolution, I just want to make sure we're kind of all aligned as to what that is. So the actual interest rate ends up going up by $370,497, but because we were able to sell the bond issue at a premium, we actually got more money for that bond issue. We can take that to offset some of the interest expense, which then nets the interest expense down to the $215,000 that would be an adjustment to the tax levy.
So in other words, the tax levy for debt service is going up by $215,000.
That is correct. The net impact.
That's all
of
you
that
really need to tell us, and we're all good with it.
And that is the motion, that is the motion in front of you.
Right.
Is there a second to that motion? By Beckfield, Supervisor Beckfield? A discussion? I think we've had it. All in favor of the motion, oh, excuse me, let's use our keypads. Please use your keypad to vote on that particular issue. (27-1), and it passes. Having finished now the process for both the capital budget, unless someone suddenly comes up with something different, we are at a point where we can look to have a resolution to adopt the budget. And that resolution is going to be emailed to you, I do believe.
If there are no other.
Are there any other changes? Any other changes? I'm not seeing anyone. And if not, you will receive a copy of this once it is passed, including the amendments. So as we make this motion to approve the budget, it will be a motion to approve as amended. And I would look for a motion.
Well,
from Supervisor Smyer, seconded by Supervisor Burboom. Further discussion? Seeing none, please take your keypads and vote on the budget. And the budget is passed. Thank you for all your work. We'll turn the meeting back to Supervisor Smyer.
People really hate that. Really hate that.
We're not done yet.
And remember, ladies and gentlemen, remember that you're not done yet. You've got just a few more items on your regular agenda. You have have a few more items on your regular agenda, maybe about 10, 15 more.
Supervisors, please be seated. I believe we can finish our business before 11 o'clock. We have only a few items left here. Shouldn't miss anything here. Under item 11, reports of standing committees, commissions, and boards, file 63. Oh, I'll go back. I'll go back. It's okay. 63. Yeah.
63 is amending. Yeah, you'll go back. Amending the 1982 official zoning district boundary map for the town of Washington.
Motion? My apologies, that is an ordinance, therefore it is a first reading, you're correct. And that will come back, as long as you're doing the ordinances. File 73. Okay. The clerk has pointed out to me that this is a zoning matter, and we do vote on it. Supervisor Leary.
Sorry, the motion.
So could I have a motion on file 63, please? Motion by Supervisor Anderson, second by Supervisor Russell. Speaking to this, planning developed, Supervisor Gibson? Supervisor Gibson?
Oh, you got it on now. All right. Okay. This is rezoning 20 acres of land from agricultural preservation district to the A2 agriculture residential to allow for the family members to develop on the land. This was went to the town of Washington. They voted in favor of this. It was reviewed at planning and development. He voted in favor of it, and it was recommended by planning and development department. So I would ask for approval.
Thank you. Are there any questions, or is there any discussion regarding this file? I see none. Supervisors, please take your keypads in hand and vote on file 63.
Henning, come on, Ray.
Come on, vote, Ray.
Go ahead, hit it.
Supervisor Morris.
Hey, come on, Ray. Rain Man.
The vote is unanimous. Thank you very much. The item I skipped over is file 71.
To amend section 4.35.200 of the code, overpayments and underpayments.
That is,
It's an ordinance.
This is an ordinance, so therefore this is first reading, and this will be referred to a future meeting. I don't think we have very much to do. Oh, sorry. We have one appointment, our final item, to the Eau Claire City County Board of Health. I've approved the appointment of Dr. Terrence Miskelin, and also Dr. Brianna Lisa Newton, looking to the board for approval of this appointment. A motion by Supervisor Boerboom, second by Supervisor Henning. Any questions? Please take your keypads in hand and vote on the two appointments. Supervisor Bates, oh, okay.
And Supervisor Leary?
Robin.
Thank you. That vote is unanimous. We have reached the end of our agenda, 15 minutes ahead of time. We are adjourned.
This program was brought to you by a cooperation between Newsworks and the City of Eau Claire. A transcript of this meeting is available for the hearing impaired. It will be available within 7 days of this telecast. Call 715-839-4912 or TDD 715-839-1689. Or write Eau Claire City Clerk, P.O. Box 5148, Eau Claire, Wisconsin 54702-5148. Newsworks is made possible by continuing community support. If you would like to volunteer or make a donation, please contact us via phone at